Good evening and welcome back. Tonight, we're going to trace the beginnings of one of the most enduring legends in human history, the dragon. Why do cultures all over the world tell stories of enormous, scaled creatures that breathe fire or control water? Where did these ideas come from, and why do they appear in places as far apart as China, Europe, and the Americas? We'll look at some of the earliest dragon myths, from China to Europe and beyond, and see how each culture shaped the creature in its own way. Some saw dragons as wise and protective, others as destructive and terrifying. Yet somehow, the image of the dragon has lasted for thousands of years and is still with us today. As always, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you? Whether you're settling in for the night or just curious about where these legends came from, I'm glad you're here. Now, let's begin. If you go back to the first written stories, the world begins with a storm and a struggle. The enemy is not a king or a neighbor. It is a serpent, the size of a sea. The earliest scribes in Mesopotamia set it on clay. They called the primordial waters Tiamat, a mother of gods who took the shape of a vast sea creature. In the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, the young god Marduk faces Tiamat in a trial before all the gods. He raises a net to snare her and summons the winds until the seas are torn open. When she opens her mouth to swallow, the winds rush in and hold her wide. He looses an arrow that pierces her heart. After the battle, he does something that tells you how ancient people thought about order and chaos. He cuts her in two. From one half, he makes the dome of heaven. From the other, he makes the earth. Rivers spring from her eyes, the great channels that will water the land. The body of the chaos serpent becomes the map for a habitable world. Creation is not a gentle blossoming. It is the taming of a monster. That way of seeing things runs through the oldest cultures of the Near East. The Hittites told of a storm god who battles a serpent named Ilyanka. In one version, the serpent steals the storm god's eyes and heart, which is a sharp old image for a world without sight and courage. Through guile and a feast laid out by a goddess, the serpent is bound with rope and slain, and the god receives back what was taken. In another telling, the god wins by marrying his son into the serpent's house, then forces a final duel in which the son must die with the monster. These are not simple adventure tales. They are parables about what order costs and about how far a divine king might go to restore the balance. Along the Levantine coast, on tablets from Ugarit, the storm lord Baal fights a seven-headed sea serpent named Lotan. The text calls it the fleeing serpent and the twisting serpent. The words will echo centuries later in the Hebrew scriptures, where Leviathan appears as a sea dragon whom the Lord breaks and scatters. In the Psalms, you read that the heads of sea monsters were crushed and the heads of Leviathan broken. In the book of Job, Leviathan surges up as a beast of impossible scale. Smoke pours from its nostrils. Iron becomes straw before it. It laughs at the rattling of the spear. The language is poetry, but the point is plain. The world is full of forces that mock human strength, and in the end, only a greater power can master them. Egypt turned the pattern into a daily ritual. Every night, the sun god sails the dark river of the underworld, and every night, the serpent Apep rises. Priests wrote whole books of spells to bind him, to cut him into pieces, to spit on his name. The Book of Overthrowing Apep prescribes wax figures to be trammeled, stabbed, and burned, so that the real snake of darkness is weakened and the dawn returns. Temple walls show Mayan, the protective serpent, coiled around the solar bark to shield it in the hours when the sky is black. You can feel the Nile country's rhythm in this liturgy. The flood surges and recedes. The sun sets and rises. If the people do their part with right and word, the serpent will be checked and the seasons will hold. Not every serpent was a total enemy. The Mesopotamians carved a dragon called the Mush-Ushu on the blue bricks of Babylon's Ishtar Gate. It has the body of a serpent, the forelegs of a lion, the rear talons of a bird, and a horned head. It stands as an emblem of Marduk and of Nabu, a guardian on the city's threshold. Here the dragon is not the sea of chaos. It is the tamed strength that now serves the city and its god. The difference matters. The same shape can be a world breaker in one story and a ward against danger in another. What changes is not the scales or the claws, but the place the creature occupies in the order of things. Persian tradition preserves a darker serpent. In the Avesta, the demon Azai-Dahaka is a three-headed dragon who brings drought, deceit, and ruin. Later, poets call him Zahak, and add that snakes grew from his shoulders when he fell under a tempter's kiss. He is finally bound on a mountain to wait for the end of days. That image of the dragon chained is a cousin of other bindings in the region. Tie the serpent, and the world can breathe again. Leave it loose, and the wells dry up. For a land that lives by rivers and seasonal rains, the metaphor does not need much explanation. This whole family of stories carries a single shape at its heart. A serpent, or sea dragon, stands for the raw power that defeats and unravels. It can be a flood or a drought, plague or eclipse, invasion or civil collapse. Ancient storytellers do not point to a weather map, they call up a creature. When the waters rage at the wrong time, the snake is thrashing. When the river comes on schedule and spreads black silt over the fields, the snake has been restrained. The language is mythic, but the stakes are practical. People wanted to live and plant and see children grow. If that was going to happen, someone had to face the monster. You can also see how these myths trained people to think about kingship. A good king is a slayer or binder of serpents. He is the one who cuts the knot of chaos and makes the channels flow. The liturgy in Egypt that tramples the wax images of Apep confirms the power of the pharaoh and the priestly order. The Enuma Elish ends with the gods granting Marduk 50 names and the right to rule. Even the protective dragon on Babylon's gate tells every traveler that this city has put the wild under its heel. There is politics in the coils of every serpent. Art fixes the memory. Cylinder seals show long-bodied creatures twined around shrines and gods. Reliefs paint the dragon of Babylon with a forked tongue and a ridged back. In tombs along the Nile, you find the solar serpent and the snake that menaces the night boat. These are not fanciful decorations. They are arguments made in clay and stone. The world will hold because the serpent has a place, and that place is either chained or sanctified. The story is repeated every time a farmer plows a straight line in a field that floods and recedes on cue. What gave rise to such a wide agreement on the serpent as the face of chaos? Part of the answer is simple experience. Large snakes are startling even to people who live with them. Crocodiles in African and Near Eastern rivers look like dragons when they surge from muddy water. In storms, the sea itself snakes and coils. The line of a great wave is a moving ridge. The air hisses before the squall breaks. A people who live close to rivers and coasts, and who measure life by flood seasons, do not need a scholar to tell them what a monster looks like. Nature shows them the profile every year. There is also the long memory of bones. Across Asia, people dug up great fossils and called them dragon bones. In later centuries, apothecaries would grind such bones for medicine. Long before that, a jaw full of teeth or a rib cage from a strange cliff would have been enough to confirm the old stories. You do not have to know what a dinosaur is to feel that something inhuman once swam or strode here. The mind supplies scales and smoke. The tail of the serpent grows another ring. When you step back and look across the first civilizations, the pattern holds with small local turns. Mesopotamia dramatizes creation as a dragon fight and hangs the sky on the bones. Egypt ritualizes the nightly duel so the dawn can be guaranteed. Anatolia tells of a storm god who has to win back his heart and eyes from the snake. Canaan sets a seven-headed serpent against the rain god. Israel takes up the language and makes the victory the Lord's alone. Persia makes the dragon a plague-bearer, who must be bound until time's last day. In each case, the serpent is the image of what must be mastered for life to go on, whether that is flood, drought, darkness, or the arrogance of a bad ruler. This is why the serpent of chaos sits at the start of our dragon story. Before the mailed wings and the horde, before the knight and the lance, there is the river god with a net, and the priest with a knife of flint, and the king who promises to hold back the dark. The dragon is first a shape for the problem of the world. How do you turn danger into order? How do you make days that follow each other in a line? The answer the ancients gave was stark. You find the serpent, and you put it to use, or you put it to the sword. The oldest storytellers did not leave the serpent alone in the dark. They set a figure against it and gave that figure a name, a weapon, and a reason to fight. The shape changes with each land, but the bones of the plot remain steady. The world is not right. Water is withheld or floods rage without end. The people cannot plant. A city is threatened. A god or a champion steps forward and faces a creature that coils around what everyone needs. The fight is not sport. It is a struggle for a livable world. In the hymns of the Rig Veda, the storm god Indra earns his place by killing a dragon called Vritra. Vritra withholds the waters, and the land dries and cracks. Indra drinks the sacred draught that gives courage, lifts the thunderbolt, and strikes. The hymns love exact images. They say that when Indra smote, the mountains split, the cattle ran free, and the 7 rivers burst forth to their courses. That is a clean way to tell a river culture that the flood has come on time. Later poets fill in more detail. They say the thunderbolt was forged by a craftsman of the gods, and that a great sage gave his bones so that the weapon would have strength. The truth that matters is older than these additions. Storm, thunder, and rain are the tools that break the serpent of drought. The hero is a sky figure who brings water back to the fields. Across the Iranian plateau you find a kindred battle. The old scriptures tell of a champion named Thraitaona, who defeats a many-headed serpent called Azidahaka. The dragon carries famine and lies, which are as deadly as empty wells. When Thraitaona strikes, he frees the land, and the people bless him as a restorer. In later tales, the serpent is bound on a mountain to wait until the last day. That binding is important. Not every victory ends with a corpse. In many places, the right end is a chain. The monster must be kept where it cannot wreck the order of the seasons. Travel west and you hear the storm king Baal clash with a sea serpent named Lotan on the coast of Canaan. The old tablets call Lotan the fleeing serpent and the twisting serpent, and they give him 7 heads. 7 is not only a number, it is a measure of abundance and a sign of total power. A god who cuts 7 heads has not only won a duel, he has proved that he can master a chaos that renews itself. Later, the poets of Israel will remember this shape when they sing that the Lord breaks the heads of Leviathan in the waters. The monster is an emblem for whatever rises up against life. The god who rules the storm is the only one who can put it down. Greece carries the story into a landscape of mountains and islands, and there the dragon often guards a spring, a grove, or a treasure. Zeus, the king of the sky, fights Typhon, a serpent whose heads spew fire and smoke. When Zeus hurls his lightning, he buries the serpent beneath the earth, and some say that the hot breath that comes up through mountain vents is the body of Typhon still stirring. Apollo kills Python at Delphi so that his oracle can take root beside the sacred spring. Cadmus kills a serpent sacred to Ares and sows its teeth. And armed men leap from the ground. A mythic way to say that a city can grow from blood and courage. Heracles meets the Hydra in a foul marsh and learns that strength alone will not do. Each time he cuts, the wound multiplies. Only when his companion cauterizes the necks does the hero win. Greek tales are frank about the cost of victory. They show sweat, fear, and the invented trick that turns the fight. The lesson is not only that the serpent can be beaten, it is that the serpent is clever and that only a prepared mind will come back alive. The Hittites in Anatolia, who lived between steppe and forest, tell of a storm god who first loses to a serpent named Illuyanka. The serpent steals the god's eyes and heart. Through the counsel of a goddess and a mortal hunter, the god regains what was taken and binds the serpent at a feast. He kills the monster, but must sacrifice his own son, who has married into the serpent's house. This is a hard story, and it feels older than triumphal hymns. It says two things at once. Order can be restored, but there is always a price. And a serpent that wins once can be beaten the second time if the god and the people set a trap and hold the rope together. Egypt keeps the rhythm of victory on a clock that strikes every night. The crew of the sunboat faces the serpent Apep in the hours of darkness. Priests in temples far from the desert mouth of the river spit on wax figures, stab them, burn them, and grind their ashes to make sure the world opens again to light. The victory is ritual, and it is repeated. In truth, this may be the more honest account. No single fight ever tames the world for good. Every season has its serpent. Every night has a black river. The people work and pray, and the story is told again so that grain can be sown with a steady hand. You can see how the parts line up across these lands. The opponent is serpentine. Often it has many heads. It lives in water or controls water. It hoards what should flow. The champion is a stormbringer, or a figure who borrows the storm's tools. He carries thunder, lightning, or a spear that mimics both. He frees a river, opens a spring, or clears a sky. The result is not only the death or binding of a beast, it is the rebirth of a landscape. The people do not cheer a trophy on a wall. They cheer rain striking fields that had cracked. The old language of a scholar would call this a shared pattern. Today, a simpler thought will do. Neighbors learn from neighbors, and tribes carry their songs when they move. Long before ships stitched the edges of the Mediterranean to the Indus, people traded not only copper, tin, wool, and grain. They traded the names of gods and the shapes of monsters. A good story travels faster than a caravan. Once you have heard of a hero who releases the water by spearing a serpent in a mountain pass, it is hard to forget it when you look at a river bursting from a limestone gate after the rains. These fights are not only about weather and farming, they also teach what a leader is meant to be. The god who sits on a throne must have slain or bound a dragon. The human king, who claims the god's favor, must copy the deed in juster wars, fair laws, and the building of canals. In Mesopotamia, kings cut channels through the silt and called them gifts of Marduk. In Egypt, a pharaoh proved that he held Apep at bay by maintaining temples, watching the calendar, and seeing to storehouses that could soften the lean years. The hero in the story is not a private adventurer. He is an image of good rule. If he fails, the serpent is not the only thing that wins. So do famine, banditry, and despair. The fight also carries a smaller meaning that anyone can feel. The monster can stand for a sickness, a drought of the heart, a fear that wakes you in the small hours. The hero can be a parent who refuses to give in, a wise woman who knows when to heat the iron, a group of neighbors who rope the problem and pull together. Myths do not survive only because priests repeat them. They survive because the mind recognizes parts of its own experience in the old scenes. There is always a river to free. There is always a wound that will not close, unless you find the right fire. The old world did not stop telling the story when cities fell and new tongues came. In a Greek poem that schoolboys still read, Perseus flies to a shore, and finds a royal daughter chained to a rock while a sea monster rises from the deep. He uses a mirrored shield to turn a greater monster to stone and wins the day. In another tale, Jason sings a serpent to sleep so that he and his crew can steal a golden fleece and a way home. These are variations on an old chord. The serpent guards what is needed. The hero finds the one tactic that will work. Sometimes it is a hardened edge. Sometimes it is a lullaby and a draught of herb. If you lift your eyes to the north, where the sagas grew among fjords and long winters, the pattern changes mood, but not substance. There the serpent can be the world-girdling sea creature that even the gods fear, and the hero can be a fisherman god who heaves on a line until the boat tilts and the horizon slides. On another day, the serpent is a dwarf-turned-dragon who coils on a hoard in the heath. The slayer is a boy trained by a wandering smith who lies in a trench and drives a sword upward as the belly passes. Different climate, different temper, same bones in the story. The monster sits on what the world needs, whether that is water, peace, or wealth gathered from long labor. The hero pays in blood and pain to set it loose again. These tales were not told to children as fancies before the lamp went out. They were told as proof and as warning. Proof that the forces that look unbeatable can be mastered. Warning that nothing stays mastered without watchfulness. The serpent does not die once for all. It comes back in the next season, under a changed name. The dragon of drought returns as the dragon of flood. The beast at the spring becomes the beast in the sky when a plague spreads on a hot wind. The remedy is the same. A champion must stand up with a tool that fits the trouble, with companions who know their part, and with the patience to finish what he starts. There is one more thing that binds these stories. The hero very often does not win alone. Even when a god throws the bolt, someone has forged it. Even when a champion swings the sword, someone keeps the torch to sear the wound that will not stay shut. A goddess gives counsel. A priest keeps the night watch and speaks the words. A friend stands ready with fire. The monster is large. The answer is a fellowship. That may be why these tales are so dear to villages and courts alike. They praise courage, but they also praise the chain of hands that makes courage effective. By the time writing spreads and empires rise, the pattern is already old. It will carry forward into saints on horses and knights in bright mail. It will soak into poems where dragons talk and into songs where they burn. But at its first telling it is the simplest of human needs set against the oldest of fears. Water should run in its beds. The sun should rise. The seed should sprout. A serpent that coils around those things must be met. The hero steps out. Thunder rolls. The order of the world returns for another season. If you begin the story of dragons in China, you begin before writing and before kings, in villages that shaped jade and watched the sky for rain. Archaeologists lifting earth in the northeast have found small jade bodies bent like the letter C, heads raised, tails tucked. They call them pig dragons because the snout is rounded, but the curve and the scales mark them as something older and stranger. The people who carved them lived 5,000 years ago. They buried these figures with care. That tells you two things at once. The dragon was already sacred, and it was already linked to the fate of the living and the dead. When Chinese writing first took shape on bone and bronze, the character for dragon follows the same long body. Early scribes cut its coils beside the names of kings and the counts of harvests and sacrifices. On ritual vessels from the Shang and Zhou courts, you see masks and spirals that art historians debate, and farmers would have recognized at a glance. A sinuous beast winds through clouds. The body is serpentine. The head wears antlers. A beard fringes the jaw. There are the claws of an eagle, the whiskers of a catfish, the scales of a carp. Later, scholars would list these features like a catalogue of powers. What matters is the effect. The dragon is an animal made from the strongest parts of other animals. It belongs to the river, the mountain, and the sky at once. In Chinese, thought the dragon is first a lord of water. It rises with thunder. It coils in cloud. It lives in lakes and in the deep of the sea. Rains come because dragons move. A good year is a year when dragons are pleased. Out of this simple truth grew a whole order of worship and rule. Every region honored a dragon king who kept the waters of a lake, a river, or a sea. Magistrates burned incense at his temple and begged for rain when the fields cracked. Farmers carried images through the streets and struck drums shaped like thunder. When a drought dragged on, the local official fasted and slept on a mat of straw, then led a rite at the water's edge. When storms battered the coast and fishermen were lost, women climbed the temple steps with lamps and petitions, asking the Dragon King to calm the sea. This was not a wrinkle on the edge of belief. It was the spine of daily life in a land that rests on rice and river silt. The court in the capital claimed the dragon on a higher plane. Emperors said their right to govern came from heaven. They called their authority the mandate. To show it, they sat upon the dragon throne and wore a dragon robe embroidered with waves, mountains, and 9 coiling beasts that climb toward a flaming pearl. The pearl is a mystery that painters never stopped painting. Some say it is thunder. Some say it is the moon. Some say it is perfect wisdom. The point is constant. The dragon seeks it, and the emperor seeks it as well, which is harmony between ruler and heaven. Only the emperor could wear 5 clawed dragons. Princes and nobles had to make do with 4 or 3. The law was exact, and the message was plain. The closer you stood to the Son of Heaven, the closer you stood to the dragon. You can walk the old palace and read this claim in stone and tile. Walls in the Forbidden City carry panels of 9 glazed dragons, each different in its temper. Bridges cross the palace streams on backs of stone turtles and carved bixi that are sometimes called dragon sons. A marble ramp rises to the great halls, with more than 1,000 scales carved in relief. Even the roof lines bite the clouds, their ridge beasts shaped like small dragons that keep the fire spirit from landing. You live under dragons in that city. They watch from pillars. They curl around throne dais and incense burners. The eye is meant to understand without words. The emperor rules if the dragons are near and content. If flood or famine follows him year after year, then the dragons are displeased and heaven has turned its face. Myths fold into this public language. A very old legend tells how Yu the Great saved the land from a flood that lasted for years. He did not try to dam the waters. He studied the channels and cut new ones with the help of a turtle spirit, and sometimes with dragons who hauled earth in their claws. The flood fell. Settlements and fields returned. A dynasty began. In another tale, the Yellow Emperor takes on the aspect of a dragon at his death and rises to heaven. That is not a boast about a body of scales. It is a way to say that a founder's spirit joins the realm of thunder and cloud. Other stories soften the grandeur. A farmer named Dong Fu learns the will of dragons and tames them with an honest heart. A village turtle becomes a dragon when it grows old and wise. The lesson is constant. Dragons favor those who align themselves with the right order of things. Turn your eyes from court to stars, and the dragon rules there as well. The azure dragon of the east stands among the 4 great guardians of the sky, with the white tiger of the west, the vermilion bird of the south, and the black tortoise of the north. The dragon presides over spring and over the element of wood. When the first shoots rise and the plows move, the dragon is awake. Astronomers marked his shape in a string of constellations. Poets use that language without effort. A spring wind is a dragon stirring. A sudden storm on a warm day is a dragon rolling over in sleep. The dragon that moves through paintings and festivals is not a beast that burns villages. It is a bearer of rain and luck. In pictures it has no wings, yet it flies. Painters show it on scrolls, writhing among clouds, jaws open, whiskers streaming, eyes fixed on the pearl. One famous master painted 9 dragons in ink, so alive that the paper seems to crumple under their weight. On blue and white porcelain, a pair of dragons chase each other through waves and cloud spirals. Carvers set dragons on the heads of roof beams and on the ends of bridges where water runs. When a craftsman cast a bell for a temple, he often added a small dragon on the crown, so that the sound would carry like a roar. In the streets and fields, the dragon is not only image, it is dance and boat and song. During the first moon of the year, teams of men carry a long dragon of silk and bamboo through alleys and squares. Lanterns burn in its belly, the head snaps and dips, drums roll like thunder. Children shout and run, and old men watch with arms tucked in sleeves. The dance is a prayer to wake the New Year's luck. In the 5th month, rowers lean forward in long, narrow boats with carved dragon heads and painted scales. Drums keep time. Oars rise and flash and bite the water. The race remembers a poet who drowned himself for honor. It also speaks to the river gods in the old language of speed and rhythm. Bring rain in due season. Do not bring flood. The tradition is deep enough to have its own family of small myths. People speak of the 9 sons of the dragon. Each son has a habit. One loves to carry weight and squats like a tortoise under tablets and steles. One curls on roof ridges and watches for fire. One likes the sound of bells and serves as a bell handle or a bell boss. One bears his fangs on sword guards and door knockers to frighten thieves. Lists vary by place and century, because the point was never a fixed roster. The point was a craftsman's shorthand. If you carve this creature here, you ask for this kind of help. Even the old philosophic schools made room for the dragon. Scholars who wrote about nature in terms of 5 phases of change placed the dragon in the realm of springtime growth. Scholars who traced the proper ties between ruler and subject used the dragon as a measure. A good ruler is like a dragon that holds cloud and rain under control. A bad ruler is like a dragon that beats its tail on a lake and sends a sudden flood at night. Confucian teachers warned princes that they had to deserve their dragons. Taoist masters told stories of adepts who rode dragons through storms when they had lived long and lightly and understood the breath that moves through the world. The image is so strong that even outsiders adopted it when they needed a symbol for China. Travelers from the West, when they first saw the emperor's robe and palace walls, wrote of a land of dragons and of a throne that shone like a sky full of scaled beasts. The symbol moved onto flags, coins, and treaties. It became a political sign as well as a sacred one. In the late dynasties, rebels sometimes chose a different beast for their banners to contest the old order of scales and clouds. When the empire fell and a republic rose, the dragon stayed in festivals and crafts, even as it stepped off the flag. It is hard to ungraft a root that deep. If you set the Chinese dragon beside its Western cousin, the differences are marked, and they say much about the lands that dreamed them. The Chinese dragon does not hoard gold. It does not kidnap maidens. It rarely breathes fire. It is long and wingless, yet flies. It brings rain and commands rivers. It is patron and emblem and ancestor. People pray to it in drought and thank it when rice ripens. The emperor wears it to claim a pact with heaven. The village mason chisels it on a bridge so that the stream will behave. That is a whole society speaking with a single image about water, rule, and good fortune. One more thread completes the weave. The dragon does not live alone. It keeps company with the phoenix in art, a bird of grace and renewal. The two together stand for a balanced rule. Dragon for the emperor, phoenix for the empress. Palace builders set them in pairs so that visitors would read the message without a scroll. Harmony above will bring harmony below. Rains in season, harvest in season, festivals in season. The old fear of flood and drought is still there, but it is tamed into pageant and pattern. So when you ask why China held to dragons so tightly and for so long, the answer falls into place. The dragon stands at the junction of heaven and earth. It ties the sky's weather to the granary's grain. It ties a ruler's virtue to the welfare of the fields. It carries the hopes of a farmer on a dry morning, and the pride of a court that believes heaven watches. It is also beautiful, which matters more than books admit. A coiled body in cloud, a jaw open to a pearl, claws flexed, whiskers lifting. That is a sight that makes you believe the world is ordered and alive. If the Chinese dragon is a cloud-bearer and an emblem of rule, the dragons of the wider Asian world are a great family with many branches. They live in rivers, caves, and palaces beneath the sea. Some teach and shelter. Some must be faced with ritual or with steel. All of them hold water and fortune in their coils, and the peoples who farmed with the monsoon or fished narrow straits learned to speak to them with offerings, songs, and sometimes with a sword. Begin in India, where serpent beings called Nagas fill the old texts and the village shrines. The word can mean snake, spirit, or a king of the deep. In the Mahabharata, the Naga Takshaka brings down a king with venom and sparks the building of a great fire altar that is said to consume whole serpent clans. In another story, the serpent Kaliya poisons a river until Krishna leaps into the water and dances on his many heads to drive him away so that cattle and children can drink again. A greater Naga named Shesha lies coiled beneath the worlds and serves as the couch of Vishnu during the long sleep between creations. Poets call him Ananta, which means without end, and give him 1,000 hoods that spread like a living canopy. When the gods and the anti-gods churn the ocean of milk to draw out the nectar of immortality, they use the serpent for Suki as the rope, with gods on one side and rivals on the other, and the mountains rise and sink as the world heaves. These are not idle fancies. They make sense to a land that watches great rivers rise from snow and seeks the right relationship with waters that can bless or ruin. The Nagas are not always foes. In Bengal, people still honor Manasa, a serpent goddess who protects against snakebite and brings fertility to fields and families. In Buddhist lore, the newly awakened Buddha sits in meditation while a storm gathers. The Naga king Mukalinda rises from a lake and spreads his many hoods to shield him from wind and rain. Later, Buddhist stories speak of Naga kings who guard scriptures and relics in palaces under the water and bring them forth when a teacher is worthy. In this way, the serpent is not a dragon to be slain. It is a keeper of wisdom who chooses when to share. From India, the serpent kings travel with merchants, monks, and builders. Across the old Khmer lands, you can still run your hand along the body of a Naga carved in stone, its 7 or 9 heads rising as a fan at the ends of causeways that lead to temple gates. At Angkor, the railings of the great avenues are entire serpents in stone, guarded by giants and gods who seem to be churning them as if the whole city were a model of the first sea. Khmer legends of origin even tell of a marriage between an Indian wanderer and a Naga princess. From that union, a kingdom is born after the princess's father drinks the floodwaters so that land can appear. That image shows how the region understood rule. A rightful king is one who can make a pact with the powers of water. Follow the Mekong, and you enter lands where the Naga is a neighbor. Laos and Thailand keep river serpent shrines at bends and eddies. Boat races thunder down brown water under eyes painted large on carved dragon prows. In the far northeast of Thailand, people watch the river at the end of the rains for red fireballs that rise from the surface in the night. Villagers call them Naga lights and treat them as a sign that the river spirits stir. In many towns of the Chao Phraya Plain, temple gates rise as fanged Naga mouths, and stair balustrades run as coils that guard the way. Monks teach that a Naga once took human form to request ordination, and the tale still shapes practice. In some monasteries, a novice wears a serpent-patterned robe for his first days to honor that visitor from the deep. Turn east, and the dragon becomes the ancestor of a people. Vietnam tells how the dragon lord, Lac Long Quan, joined with the immortal Ao Company. She bore 100 children. Half went with her to the mountains. Half went with him to the coast. The country descends from that parting. Later, dynasties chose the dragon for their capitals and wrote the dream into city names. Thang Long means rising dragon and marks the old name of Hanoi. On roof tiles and imperial teki, you can see a long-bodied dragon with a gentle face, jaws open to a flaming pearl. Court ritual once measured the right to wear or carve that dragon, as in China, but village craft never gave it up. The dragon there still serves as a way to talk about rivers that swell and fields that green. Sail the island arcs to the south, and you find another branch of the serpent line. In Java and Bali, the Naga, Basuki, and Antaboga appear in dance and carving as beings who brace the earth and coil at the base of sacred mountains. Temple stairways run between Naga bodies that rise at the landings with wide flared hoods. In some places, the story of the first churning of the ocean is carved in walls and retold at festivals so that the right kind of rain will come. In the Philippines, the Bakunawa is a sea serpent who rises to swallow the moon, which explains an eclipse in a way that coastal villages can feel in their bones. When the shadow bites, people beat pots and call out to drive the serpent away. In Borneo, the Dayak carve a creature they call a so that wins like a serpent and bites like a dog and guards the edges of shields. These island dragons belong to water and wood, and the edge between. Climb into the mountains, and the dragon takes the shape of thunder. Bhutan calls itself the land of the thunder dragon, and sets a white scaled beast across its flag, claws gripping jewels that stand for prosperity and speech. The national crest and the great monasteries of the Drukpa school carry the same figure. Storms roll off the high peaks, and the roar that follows lightning is said to be the dragon's voice. In Tibet, the dragon shares ground with snow lions and wind horses. Buddhist paintings show Nagas, among the lower spirits stored under temple floors, the guardians of water and treasure, who must be kept content with offerings so that springs run clear and the wood stays sound. Korea blends court and village views into a dragon that grows by worth. Folklore tells of the Imugi, a great serpent that longs to become a true dragon. If it endures long years and seizes a luminous pearl that falls from heaven, it ascends into the clouds. The dragon that results is a Yong, a ruler of rain and river like the Chinese Long, and he is often drawn grasping that pearl. The idea that patience and virtue can lift a creature from one order to another has a strong hold on the Korean mind. It shows in village stories and in the high art of Joseon planners, who placed royal halls beside ponds, crossed by little bridges shaped with dragonbacks. There were rules for the number of claws a royal dragon could wear on a robe, and there were water rights to set right a year that began too dry. The court claimed the creature for dignity, and the farmers kept it for hope. At last you reach Japan, where the dragon keeps company with the sea, the storm, and the mountain shrine. The word is Ryu or Tatsu, and the creature looks like a cousin of the Chinese dragon with local habits of its own. It flies without wings. It calls rain when rice needs it. It guards springs on temple grounds and crouches as a fountain spout where worshippers wash their hands before they approach a deity. Old tales say there is a palace under the ocean where the sea god Ryujin keeps treasures and tide jewels that can call the sea in or send it out. A fisherman named Urashima Taro once visited that palace and married a princess there, only to find that time runs differently beneath the waves. When he returned to shore, the world had grown old without him. Other stories place the dragon in the path of a hero. The storm-born god Susanoo comes upon an old couple and their daughter who weep beside a river. An 8-headed serpent will devour the girl when it returns. Susanu brews strong sake and feeds it to each head. When the monster sleeps, he cuts it apart and finds in its tail a great blade, which later becomes one of the 3 sacred treasures of the imperial regalia. The sword is called kusanagi. The lesson is a familiar one told in a Japanese voice. Skill and planning, not only strength, win the day, and from the ruin of a serpent comes a gift that seals a dynasty. Buddhism tied these island and peninsula stories together. As monks traveled from India through Central Asia to China, Korea, and Japan, they carried with them the image of the Naga as guardian and benefactor. Temple legends everywhere tell of serpents who protect a site, bring rain when a drought bites hard, or demand that a monk make peace with a spring before he builds. When a great pagoda fell in an earthquake, chronicles might record that the Naga beneath shifted and needed to be appeased. Sometimes that meant a change in the footing stones, sometimes a rite of song and light. In this way, practical engineering and myth met without embarrassment. A builder did what worked and gave thanks to the spirit that had allowed it. If you step back, a pattern rises out of these many local tales. The Asian dragon and the Naga are tied to water, to the fertility of fields, to the rise and fall of a year. They give a face to monsoon and river. They explain the spark that runs from cloud to peak and the hiss of a spring that never dries. Courts made them badges of authority because a ruler in these lands was judged by his success at managing canals, dikes, and granaries. Villages kept them as neighbors because a family's food and safety depended on the right rains and the steady river. Where the serpent menaces, a saint or hero acts. Where the serpent protects, a wise person learns to bring offerings and restraint. You can still feel this in the textures of daily life. A child runs under a paper dragon that curls and dips at New Year in a Korean port and learns that the sea can be a friend if honored. A Lao boat team pulls in rhythm while a monk shakes a bronze bell shaped with a dragon handle and prays for a safe race and a kind season. A Balinese carver cuts scales into stone at the foot of a stair where villagers climb to leave fruit for the gods and to ask that a fever break. A Japanese visitor cups water in his palm from a dragon fountain and rinses his mouth in the clear stream before he ties a wish to a branch. These acts say the same thing without a book. We live with powers greater than ourselves. We can make peace with them. We must also be ready to stand up when they turn wild. Taken together, these dragons across Asia feel like a single river with many bends. They do not hoard gold. They do not sit in caves counting cups. They are not trophies to be shown on a spear. They are neighbors and patrons, and sometimes they are judges. They make kings honest. They make builders careful. They make farmers humble. They make storytellers brave. The people who handed these tales to their children knew what they were doing. They were telling them how to live beside water that gives life, and how to face the rare days when that same water rears up like a serpent and takes what it wants. When Greek poets used the word drakon, they meant a great serpent with a gaze that never sleeps. The root of the word speaks of looking hard and watching. In story after story, these creatures are set to guard what matters. They coil beside springs that feed a city. They lie beneath trees that bear golden fruit. They keep watch over a fleece that kings dream of stealing. A hero who wants the water, or the treasure, or the favor of a god will have to face the watcher and either kill it or find a way to pass without a wound. Delphi is the right place to begin because the myths put a serpent at the birth of that oracle. Before Apollo came, the stories say the place belonged to Earth herself. A great serpent, Python, lived there and made the spring its own. When Apollo reached the valley, he loosed his arrows and struck the creature down so that his shrine could stand near the clear water. In older tellings, the fight is chosen by the god. In later tellings, he takes revenge because Python hunted his mother. Either way, a new order replaces an old one. The god of prophecy builds his house where the earth spirit once breathed, and a dragon that guarded the place becomes a corpse. The name Pythia given to the oracle remembers the dead serpent and the rot of its body. Even victory keeps the trace of what was taken. Travel to Thebes, and you meet another serpent whose death raises a city. Cadmus follows a cow to choose a site for a new home. He sends men to fetch water from a spring sacred to Ares. A serpent rises and kills them. Cadmus goes to the spring himself, grapples the beast, and drives a spear through its jaw. At the command of Athena, he sows the serpent's teeth in the ground. Armed men spring up and fight one another until only 5 remain. These 5 help Cadmus build the walls and become founders of noble houses. The story puts a dragon at the root of a city and makes its teeth the seed of a people. It also remembers a debt. Cadmus must serve Ares for years to pay for the blood he spilled. A serpent slain gives life, but there is a reckoning. By the marshes of Lerna, Heracles meets the Hydra on a day when his strength alone will not save him. The creature lives in a foul water and has many heads. When he cuts one, 2 grow back. He has brought a nephew named Iolaus to drive the chariot. That small choice proves wise. Heracles hauls a head high. Iolaus presses a torch to the bloody stump, and the neck sears shut. They make a rhythm of it: cut, burn, and move. The last head is immortal and must be crushed under a great rock. Heracles dips his arrows in the poisoned blood and carries deadly points for the rest of his life. Later, that poison will reach him again through a shirt soaked in a centaur's lies. The Hydra is more than a beast on a hero's list. It is a lesson about a problem that grows if you strike it blind, and about the cost that lingers after you win. Far to the west, a grove holds trees with apples of gold. The Hesperides tend them, and Ladon coils around the trunks as their guardian. No thief can pass while the serpent watches. Heracles needs the apples for one of his labors. The stories disagree on what he does. In one, he kills Ladon and takes what he came for. In another, he tricks Atlas into plucking the fruit, and then finds a way to make the old Titan lift the sky again while he slips away with the prize. Both versions keep the same truth. A dragon guards treasure that glitters like the sun, and a hero must weigh risk against craft to get it. Painters love this scene, and so do vase-makers. A long body winds through branches while shining apples hang within reach and just out of reach. Across the Black Sea, another dragon lies without sleep in the grove of Ares at Colchis. The golden fleece hangs there, bright as dawn, memory of a flying ram that once saved a prince. Jason and the Argonauts reach the shore and face a task that cannot be done by force. The serpent never closes its eyes. Medea, who knows herbs and words that tame, softens the creature with drugs and song. It slackens. The hero takes the fleece off the branch and runs. Here the dragon is not killed. It is overcome by a skill that the men around Jason do not understand and that he will later betray. The story keeps the thought that a dragon is a guardian that can be lulled as well as slain, and that the one who calms it often pays a price when the ship turns home. Greek myths do not keep their dragons in caves alone. Sea monsters rise when a city has angered a god, or when a king has boasted past sense. The old word for such a beast is Ketos. When the coast of Ethiopia is cursed, Andromeda is chained to a rock as food for a creature from the deep. Perseus flies over the water with the head of Medusa in a sack, draws it out, and turns the monster to stone. In another tale, a sea beast is sent against Troy because of an insult. The city is spared when Heracles saves a royal daughter named Hesione from the jaws. These are not quite the treasure watchers of the groves and springs, but they are close kin. They belong to the rule that the sea and its gods impose. Offend them and a serpent rises. Please them, and the shore is safe again. A huge serpent stands as well at the rim of the Greek world in stories of Typhon. He is not a dragon of a spring or a tree. He is a force that rises against the sky itself. Later, poets describe him with 100 heads that blaze and roar. Zeus meets him with lightning and throws him down. Some say he lies under Mount Etna, and the fire that comes from that mountain is his breath. The tale is grand and stark. It tells a people who live near volcano and quake that the world is held in place by a victory that is never fully silent. The ground can still shudder when the old enemy rolls in his sleep. In the oldest Greek poems, the word drakon often means a snake, not a winged monster. The poets of the Iliad read omens in serpents that appear on the march. A snake devours birds in a tree before the eyes of the army, and a seer explains the count as a number of years the war will last. Shields carry images of snakes coiled and ready. A city wall can be called a dragon's back. The line between animal and legend remains easy. Yet the habits we now think of as dragons are all here if you look. Watchfulness, poison, many heads, a bond with water, a charge to guard sacred places and precious things. The later age that will picture wings and fire is working with clay that was already shaped. Rome does not invent many dragon stories of its own, but it preserves Greek ones and adds the weight of soldiers and naturalists who love to record marvels. Latin writers use the word Draco for great serpents in Africa and India. Pliny the Elder says a dragon will try to crush an elephant by coiling around it, and that both beasts can die in the struggle. He also says that in India, the serpent can be vast enough to stop a river when it drinks. The figures are wild, but the habit is clear. Romans treated these creatures as parts of a distant, natural world, dangerous but real enough to enter a learned book. There is a piece of Roman war lore that keeps a dragon at its heart and gives it a sound. When Roman legions fought Dacians on the Danube, they met warriors who carried a standard shaped like a dragon. A metal head with open jaws gulped wind. A long textile body streamed behind it like a living tail. When cavalry charged with the Draco high, the wind made it ripple and sing. The Romans liked what they saw, and they adopted the standard for their own units, especially for mounted troops. Later, emperors stamped coins with soldiers bearing a Draco, and law codes spoke of units called draconarii. In art from late Rome, you can still find the dragon windsock on a field, a sign of motion and fear sewn into cloth. It is not a beast at a spring, but it is a watcher all the same, a marker of where a cohort stands on the field, and a mouth that cries without a throat. Roman storytellers also kept the sea for marvels. Virgil sets a warning in the fall of Troy, when two great serpents swim from the waves and crush the priest Laocoon and his sons. He had warned his countrymen against the wooden horse. The gods who favored the Greeks send a sign that terrifies the Trojans into hauling the horse within their walls. The scene is famous because a sculptor later carved it in stone so vivid that you can see the strain in the bodies and the coils that grip them. It is not a dragon in the later style. It is a serpent of the sea called to do the work of a god, which is exactly what Greek and Roman minds expected from such creatures. Greek myths live in pictures as much as in lines of verse, and those pictures fix how later ages imagine dragons. On a black figure vase, Apollo stands over a long serpent that writhes beside a little shrine. On a red figure crater, Heracles wrestles a many-headed snake, while a friend leans in with a torch. On a painted cup, you can see Jason being spat out of the mouth of the Colchian serpent after he has taken the fleece. A clever scene that explains how he got away. Sculptors in later centuries lay a dragon at the feet of a hero like a trophy that proves the tale. The forms repeat. Long bodies, crested heads, eyes that never shut, coils around trunks and springs. If you attend to the pattern in these Greek and Roman tales, a few rules stand out. A drakon is most often a guardian. It watches over a place or a thing that is sacred or rare. It belongs to the old order of a site and must be removed or appeased if a new order is to take hold. It is linked to water and earth more than to air. It stings and strangles rather than burns. It can be put to sleep by song and herbs when iron would fail. It keeps faith with gods who value watchfulness. The hero who meets it must bring craft as well as courage. The city that rises after the fight often carries some mark of the dragon in its bones, whether in a spring that citizens never take for granted or in a family that claims to descend from the teeth sown long ago. The Romans leave us one more legacy that matters for the future of dragons in the West. By taking the Draco standard into their army, and by writing as if giant serpents were simply part of the world, they keep the creature within the bounds of the plausible. When later ages read Latin texts and look at imperial reliefs, they do not see dragons as pure dream. They see a sign that something like a dragon could exist on the edges of empire. That belief will not fade in the early medieval centuries. It will move into bestiaries that list animals of creation, and into the sermons of saints who speak of serpents as images of sin, and also as beasts that live in the next valley over. The classical world hands down both the stories and the sense that dragons belong on maps. So the Greek and Roman chapters place the dragon where a city drinks, where a hero proves himself, and where an army rides. The creature is a watcher and a test. It can die, or it can be lulled. It can be turned into a banner. It can also be buried under a god's thunder and rumble from time to time to remind men that victory is never the end. From here, the tale will climb north into colder lands, where the serpent gains wings and a hoard, and where its shadow falls over long halls and barrow mounds. Sail out of the sunlit sea of the Greeks and steer into colder water where nights are long and trees groan in winter wind. In these lands, the serpent grows larger and more patient. It curls through the roots of the world ash. It lies over barrow mounds. It learns to speak. In time, it grows wings and fire. Most of all, it learns to love gold. Not the spending of it, but the stillness of it, the weight of it, the way it shines in a dark hall when no one else is there. Norse poets set a serpent around the earth itself. They call it the Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, child of a trickster and a giantess, cast by a god into the sea. It grows until it can bite its own tail. Men who fish in long boats sometimes feel the mind bend when they think about that ring in the deep. One old song tells how Thor goes out with the giant Hymir. He cuts the head off a great ox for bait. He rows beyond the skerries and drops a line that is thicker than a man's arm. The sea heaves. The serpent rises. Thor stands in the boat and pulls until his feet crash through the planks. He lifts his hammer and the sky darkens. At the last moment, Hymir panics and cuts the line. The sea closes over the coils and the boat limps home. The story is not just about strength. It is about the feeling that the world holds something vast and coiled just beyond the horizon, and that a reckless hand might bring it up too soon. Another great serpent gnaws at the roots of the world tree. Its name is Nidhogg. It bites at the lowest root where mist and frost and dead men gather. A squirrel runs messages up and down the trunk, trading insults between the eagle in the high branches and the serpent at the base. Deer crop the bark. A dragon drinks from where rivers begin. The image is not a simple map. It is a way to talk about rot and renewal. A tree lives by drawing water and sending sap. It also lives by dropping leaves to darken its own soil. When the poets say a dragon chews at the root, they mean that all things have something working at their base that would undo them if no care were taken. From the wide frame of the cosmos, the tales narrow to a single barrow and a single man. In the Volsunga saga, there is a dark story about gold and the change it works in a heart. A dwarf named Andvari hoards treasure in a river and wears a ring that helps him hide. A god and his companions force him to give it all up as payment for a blood debt after a hunter kills an otter, who is not an otter at all. The dwarf warns that the ring and the hoard are cursed. The warning holds. The treasure passes to a father named Hreidmar. His son Fafnir kills him for the gold and drags it away. He goes alone to a heath and settles over it, until the man becomes a dragon in deed and in form. He breathes poison, he watches without sleep. He has no need for sunlight as long as the metal is near. Against him comes a boy named Sigurd, taught by the smith Regin, who is the brother of Fafnir and who covets the gold for himself. The plan is simple and careful. Dig a pit where the dragon drags its belly to a water place. Lie in the trench with a good sword. Stab upward when the weight passes and do not shirk. Sigurd does this under a sky as calm as an eye. Steel slides into belly and out again. Blood floods the trench. The dragon speaks. Fafnir asks the boy his name and his parentage and tells him he has been set up. He warns him that the gold will be the death of every hand that tries to hold it. The boy answers with the plain sense of the young. A man must die someday. He may as well die with great deeds behind him. When it is done, he tastes the dragon's blood. Birds begin to speak to him. They tell him that Regin is sharpening a blade to kill him as he sleeps. Sigurd rises, cuts off the smith's head, loads the gold on the backs of horses, and rides into a long doom of love and grief. The dragon falls. The curse does not. In later ages, singers on a different river will keep the same bones but change the names. They will sing of Siegfried, who kills a dragon, bathes in its blood, and grows hard to wound except in the one small place where a leaf fell and kept the skin soft. In the Old English poem about Beowulf, the dragon comes at the end as the final measure of a king. Long years have passed since the hero swam through winter seas to fight a shadow in a hall and then a mother in a cavern. He has ruled his people and grown old. In a headland barrow lies an ancient hoard sealed up with the bones of dead men. There is a cup in that hoard, and the hand of a thief finds it in the dark and steals away. The dragon wakes at the loss of a single piece, feels the empty place, and rises in anger. It goes out by night and pours fire over farm and roof. Beowulf gathers men and walks to the barrow. At the door his chosen warriors stumble and freeze. One young thane named Wiglaf does not. He runs forward with his lord. The dragon comes like a storm through the doorway. Beowulf's shield melts. He strikes, the sword breaks, he is burned. Wiglaf drives his blade into the soft place under the wing. The king finds a dagger and cuts the beast through the throat. The flames die. The cave sings with the quiet ring of piled gold. Beowulf sits down against the stone. He asks to see the treasure and thanks God that he has won it for his people. He gives his golden collar to Wiglaf and says his last words. He dies there with smoke in the air and the light of coins on the wall. The men build a barrow on a sea cliff and burn him on a pyre. They bury the treasure with him. A woman sings a dirge that speaks of wars to come and of enemies over the sea. The poem says the dragon lay there dead by the stone wall, the one who had guarded the hoard for winters without number. What stays with you is not only the fight. It is the sense that gold kept in the dark grows a life of its own and calls to something scaled and watchful. The barrow becomes a kind of living wound in the land. It draws men and mischance. It asks for a king to empty it and pay for that act with his life. The north has smaller worms as well, the kind that slide out of wells and into ballads. In England, folk tell of the lambton worm. A young lord skips church to fish and hauls up a pale thing like an eel with eyes he does not like. He throws it into a well and goes off to seek his fortune in distant wars. While he is away, the worm grows in the dark and then crawls out. It wraps itself around a hill. It eats cattle and knocks down stone walls with the sweep of its tail. The lord comes home and seeks counsel from a wise woman. He has armor made with knives fixed to it all over like thorns. He meets the worm in the river where the current will carry away the pieces. The monster wraps him tight, cuts itself on the blades, and dies. There is a final turn that gives the tale its sting. He had promised to kill the first living thing he saw after the fight to break a curse. He cannot do it. From that day his house fails, and his line bears the weight of his choice. Across the border in the North Country is the Linton worm. It lives in a cave and ravages fields until a knight named Somerville rides against it. He forges a spear with a wide iron head and wraps pitch and hemp around it. He lights the binding and rams the fire into the open mouth until the cave runs with smoke and the worm bursts. Far to the islands there is a tale of the great storeworm that coils in the sea and demands a princess every week. A young man no one counts for much steals a boat, sails into the open mouth, and cuts out the liver. He lights it with a coal carried from home. The beast thrashes and dies. Teeth fall into the sea and become the Orkney and Shetland Isles. These tales have the flavor of peat, smoke, and tide. They teach that a monster can swallow a shore, and that wit and nerve can light a fire in the belly of it. You can see the dragon in wood and stone as well as in songs. Carvers in Norway made churches where the ridge beams end in dragon heads that bite the air above the eaves. The old stave timbers are set with woven creatures, slim bodies with claws and long necks that knot around each other. The style is all curve and bite. It is as if the walls remember that a world serpent lies under every village. On rune stones, the bands that hold the words are often bodies of serpents that twist as the letters walk along the back. The writing itself becomes a dragon you can follow with your finger. Ships carry the same sign. Long boats cut narrow fjords with a head on the prow that glares at foreign shores. The old laws in Iceland say you must take the dragon head off before you make land, so that you do not frighten the land spirits who live there. That is a good window into the northern mind. The head is a weapon of fear in war. It is also a thing that can offend the powers of a place if you bring it into a quiet bay. Men of these coasts knew there are spirits that help when treated with respect. A wise captain puts down the snarling face before he sails for home. Gold sits under all these stories like embers under ash. The north is full of hoards left in bogs and buried in barrows. Some were offerings to gods. Some were stashed in trouble and never reclaimed. Some were a lord's pride. When later men dig up arm rings and bosses and cups from black soil, they understand why stories grew about sleeping wealth. A barrow with a ring of stones and a door that faces the sea invites a tale. It is not hard to believe that a scaled thing lies in there, eyes half shut, counting in silence. The poets turned that feeling into a rule. A dragon loves gold because gold does not ask questions or change sides or give orders. It only shines. The dragon's love is the last step in the greed that starts in human hands. The moral tone of dragon tales sharpens as you move toward the High Middle Ages. In the oldest Norse songs, a dragon is a fact of the world. It is a danger you address with a spade and a sword. In the later English poem, the dragon has become more than a beast. It is the cost of kingship. It is the temptation to sit on wealth in a hall while the world outside burns. In ballads, the worm is sometimes a curse laid on a person who wronged a witch or a princess who was wronged by her kin. You can kill an animal. You must lift a curse. The dragon becomes a mirror angled toward the heart. Out of these northern tales come the pieces that later writers fit together with iron nails. A dragon that hides in earth and guards a hoard. A dragon that flies and burns fields when a cup goes missing. A dragon that speaks and uses thought like a blade. A boy with a sharp edge and a shovel. An old king with a broken sword and one loyal young man beside him. A barrow on a cliff that the sea pounds in winter. A ring that brings ruin to every hand that wears it. You can feel how close these are to the ground. They belong to people who buried their dead with goods, who knew how it felt to lose cattle to something that moved in the night, who took gold as payment and saw what it did to friends. The North does not abandon the older sense of the serpent either. Jormungandr waits in the sea until the last day when it will come ashore to meet Thor. The god will kill it and walk 9 steps before he falls dead from venom. Nidhogg will rise from the root and fly over a plain of bodies. These are dark pictures, and they are meant to remind men that even the best swing of a hammer is only a stay against the turn of the wheel. Still, the stories that take root in the human mind are the ones with a man and a mound and a bright edge. Those are the tales that lie behind every later picture of a dragon stretched over treasure, and behind the old habit of calling gold by the names of the creatures that lay on it. Poets talk about Fafnir's bed. They talk about the fire of the hoard. They mean gold, but they also mean the cost of it. This is the face of the dragon that will stride into the next age. It will meet saints on horseback and knights in mail. It will wear wings more often. It will burn. It will keep the old love of treasure and the old gift of watchfulness. It will stand as a test of courage and a test of the soul. The road from a god fighting a sea serpent to a soldier facing a worm in a river is straight enough when you follow it in the north. When the old gods faded and the church bells began to mark the hours, the dragon did not vanish. It changed neighbors. It moved from spring and sacred grove to village square and church wall. Priests preached about it. Painters set it under the hooves of saints. Children watched plays on feast days where a scaled monster gulped smoke and a holy rider drove it back with a lance. In this new world, the dragon was more than a creature. It was a lesson with claws. It stood for pride, greed, and the dark breath that spreads fear like a sickness. It also stood for the old powers that the church said must bow to a higher rule. Most people begin with St. George because his story took hold from the eastern shores of the Mediterranean to the rainy fields of England. The old Passion of the Saints says he was a soldier who died for the faith. Later tellers gave him a horse, a lance, and a city in trouble. In the Golden Legend, a book of saints' tales that spread in the 13th century, the scene is set near a town called Silene. A dragon has taken a marsh and poisoned the water. The people buy peace with sheep. When the flocks fail, they tie children to stakes at the shore. At last, the lot falls to the king's daughter. She stands by the water in ceremonial dress while the town weeps behind closed doors. George rides into the story as if from a door in the sky. He makes the sign of the cross. He charges with the lance and strikes true. The wounded beast thrashes. He calls to the princess to throw her sash. She loops it around the dragon's neck, and it follows her like a placid hound through the gate. The people cry out. The saint tells them that the town must turn to God. They do so. Only then does he kill the dragon cleanly and quietly. In this version, the battle is not simply between a knight and a beast. It is a sign that faith tames terror and sets the well free for all. The name and banner of George traveled with crusaders. In the east, he was already a soldier saint. On the long road and under strange skies, men liked the thought that he rode with them. By the time English kings raised companies under a red cross on white, George had become a kind of patron of courage. His feast was kept in England by royal order in the 13th century. Guilds took him as protector. Painters on panel and wall gave him a fine horse and a calm face and set the dragon at his spear point. You can stand before an Italian painting and see the moment when the lance slides through the ribs. The princess holds a leash. A city wall rises in the distance. A small crowd peers from a turret. It is theatre and theology at once. There are other saints whose stories hold dragons with a different touch. Saint Margaret of Antioch is remembered as a young woman who would not renounce her faith. Prison guards break and drag her. In the legend, a dragon appears in her cell and swallows her whole. She prays and lifts a small wooden cross. The cross wounds the belly from within, and she bursts out alive. In that sign, the tale taught women to call on her in childbirth and danger. It also gave stone carvers something fierce to set on tympanum and font, a small girl stepping calmly from a torn serpent, while a cross still shines in her hands. In France, people told how Saint Martha met a creature called the Tarasque along the Rhone. Fishermen had cursed it for breaking nets and dragging boats under. Soldiers had failed to kill it. Martha sprinkled the beast with holy water and sang a psalm. The Tarasque grew tame and let her lead it back to town with a simple cord. People gathered and struck it in fear. The creature died there. The townsfolk felt the weight of that act and begged the saint to forgive them. To this day, Tarascon keeps a summer feast with a great wooden beast on wheels and a company of drummers who lead it through the streets. It is a remembrance of a dragon who fell to a hymn rather than a blade. On the Seine, another bishop left his mark on Martian memory. The people of Rouen told of a creature called the gargouille that lurked by the river, wrecked boats, and sent up smoke that blackened the air. Saint Romain faced it with prayer and with a volunteer from the town. He slipped his stole around its neck and led it back like a bridled horse. The townspeople burned the creature but kept its head as a warning and a charm. Stonemasons took the name and set gargoyles on the edges of cathedral roofs. Water pours from their mouths in rain so that the walls stay dry. The dragon that once breathed out foul air now spits clean water away from carved saints. It is a small victory cut into stone and mortar. Across the sea in the old Celtic lands, the saints and dragons talk more quietly. A Breton tale says, Saint Carantoc came to a village by an estuary and found a dragon that frightened cattle from the river. He set his altar stone on the ground and said Mass. When he finished, he lifted the stone as if it weighed nothing and walked to the water. He held his stole out as a leash. The dragon bowed its head and followed. The king of the land promised a site for a church and kept his word. In such stories, the saint does not fight. He orders the world, and the beast takes its place. Faith is shown as a rule that keeps river and pasture from crossing into one another. The archangel Michael stands above them all as the church's great dragon slayer. The book of Revelation shows him fighting the ancient serpent and casting it down. Painters gave him a shield and a spear and set a scaled body under his feet. In some works, he weighs souls on a balance while the dragon tries to cheat the scale with a claw. The message is plain. Evil will not prevail while the captain of heaven keeps watch. Shrines on lonely mountaintops bear his name. Pilgrims climb steps in sea, fog, or thin air and kneel at altars that look out over borders of earth and cloud. The dragon is sometimes only a coil in the carving near his ankle, but everyone knows what it means. Men and women in those centuries did not file dragons with unicorns as harmless fancy. Bestiaries listed dragons among the largest of serpents. Isidore of Seville wrote that the dragon loved caves and ran from the smell of crushed laurel. Travelers returned with crocodile skins and hung them above doors in churches as trophies of dragons slain in Egypt or the Levant. Whales washed ashore and left ribs and jawbones that could be mounted as signs of monsters from the deep. Apothecaries sold glossopetrae, which are fossil shark teeth, under the name of dragons' tongues. People ground them and wore them against poison. Scholars smile at this now. A farmer in a coastal parish with a black tide in the reeds did not smile. He walked past a church porch and saw a huge jaw hung high and felt better for it. Sermons used the dragon to teach the shape of sin. The coils were pride and envy. The breath was slander and plague. The hoard in its cave was the wealth that a rich man kept from the poor while the village starved. In a stained glass window you might find a dragon at the foot of a drinking well. Above it a saint raises 2 fingers in blessing and a stream runs clear into a bucket. The scene is a diagram for a whole way of life. If the well is to run sweet, someone must stand between the community and whatever fouls it. The someone is a priest, a saint, a just ruler, or a neighbor who refuses to be afraid. The theatre of the parish took up this teaching and gave it voice. On St. George's Day, some towns staged a play where a dragon built of canvas and ash sticks wove through the crowd with a man inside to pull a cord that worked the jaws. Boys ran in fear and delight. A girl in white walked beside with a ribbon for a leash. When the spear struck home, the dragon belched smoke. Drummers beat their hands raw. Afterward, a procession wound to the church for a blessing and a fair. This was not mockery of faith. It was faith that everyone could enter, with laughter for the brave and the nervous both. In cathedral sculpture, the same idea was made grand. Timpana above doors showed saints standing calm while a dragon crawled at their hem. Capitals on columns coiled with scaled bodies that met vines and leaves in tidy knots. Pulpits carried carvings of George or Michael, so that every sermon rose from a base that had already preached a wordless homily on courage. A person who could not read a letter could read that. There were quieter uses too. When plague came and bells tolled without pause, processions wound through streets with relics and candles. Some towns set out figures of dragons on carts and dragged them out of the gate and into the fields, as if to cast pestilence from the walls. The language here is old, older than the altar and the tower, but the church did not disdain it. A priest who had buried a dozen in a week used every means to steady hearts. If hauling a wooden serpent passed the well-bought silence for one night and courage for one morning, that was good work. In this medieval world, the dragon kept two faces. One was a beast in the marsh at the edge of a town. The other was the devil in a sermon. Often the two were the same. The worn note in many lives was not terror of a monster. It was the fear that a season or a sickness would break them. The tales of saints and dragons admit that fear. They answer it with an image of a person who stands between terror and the people and does not run. Sometimes that person fights. Sometimes that person speaks and the beast obeys. Sometimes that person binds a wound or blesses a well. The shape of the story fits the shape of a parish year. The shift from the ancient dragon to the medieval one is not a break. The creature still guards water. It still lies near treasure and roads. It still troubles ships. What is new is the conviction that the right word and the right sign can check it. Where older heroes carried thunderbolts, the saints carry rights and patience. Where older kings sowed teeth to build a city, the bishops set up fonts and altars and teach the people to hold steady. The dragon is made to serve as a teacher of both peril and hope. By the time this age ripened, the dragon was everywhere you looked. It spat rain from a gargoyle. It coiled on the page of a bestiary, beside a note that warned of its glare. It lay under the feet of Michael on a rood screen. It beat a drum in a May play and made children squeal. It hung from a church beam as a crocodile from far away. It crouched in the mouth of a cave outside a village in a story told at night when the wind moaned through the trees. The creature had become a common language. When people said dragon, they meant a danger faced together and a victory that depended on courage and grace. All this prepared the ground for the next kind of tale. Priests were not the only ones to stand between a village and a beast. Knights and common men stepped forward with iron and craft. Their stories are leaner and rougher. They speak to hunger and fear in the body as much as in the soul. They also shape the dragon in a new way, with wings and fire and a love of gold that burns the heart that covets it. Once the saints had shown that prayer could turn a monster, the lay world answered with iron and craft. These are stories of towns that wake to smoke and hoofbeats, of notices nailed to a church door asking for any man with a steady hand, of forges ringing at midnight while a smith and a squire test a blade across a billet of seasoned oak. The dragon in this world is not always a figure for sin. It is also the thing that eats sheep and drinks from the mill pond and frightens children from the lane. Knights step into the road with spear and mail and a plan, and the plan is often the difference. The English ballads keep a shelf of such fights. They like to name a hill and a brook and a gate, so that anyone who lives nearby can point to where the first shout rose. The tale of the lambton worm begins with a careless boy and a Sunday he chose to skip. He fishes the ware and hauls up a slick thing like a great eel. coils it around his arm, shudders at what looks back, and flings it into a well. He goes abroad to make a name. Years pass. The thing in the dark learns to climb. It grows, leaves the well, and wraps its body around a hill like a belt. It takes cattle from byres and slaps stone cottages to pieces with a sweep of its tail. When the prodigal comes home, he finds a county that mutters his name with the worms. He goes to an old woman for counsel. She tells him to meet the creature in the river and to have his armor studded with blades. He does as told. The worm closes in, coils to crush, and cuts itself on every iron thorn. The river runs red and carries the pieces away. The boy had sworn a harsh oath as part of the bargain. He fails to keep it. The song says his house paid for that failure in sorrow and thin years. The lesson lands twice. You can kill a monster with forethought. You do not leave the old debt unpaid. Not far off, the worm of Linton chewed its way into memory. It lay in a cave and came out to take livestock and frighten travelers on the road between farm and church. A man of the border, Somerville by name, had a spearhead forged wide, bound it with pitch and tow, and set it alight. He waited by the hole and thrust the burning iron into the open mouth. Smoke and stench rolled over the heath. The worm burst. The story is told in a few strokes because people in that country knew what a quick kill looked like and why a bit of pitch and patience could do what a dozen swords could not. The Wantley dragon is of another sort. It comes down from a ridge and knocks down stone walls just to hear them fall. It swallows a child on the way to fetch water and drinks the whole mill pond for the pleasure of it. The hero of that ballad is no saint. He is More of Moor Hall, an earthy man who drinks deep, kisses the widow, and makes jokes coarse enough to make a parson cough. He has a suit of armor made with spikes so thick that he looks like a walking hedgehog, and he meets the dragon in a glen where the ground is soft. He wrestles and rolls, gets under the belly where the scales are thin, and then he does a thing that a minstrel loves to sing. He kicks the beast in the only tender place it has left. The satire bites with the hoof. The ballad is a broad grin, but it hides a hard truth. Sometimes a monster is a greedy neighbor with a title and a sharp quill pen, and sometimes the only answer is to make a suit that fits the fight and to be shameless in the doing. There are gentler and sadder country tales as well. In Herefordshire, the Mordiford dragon crawled out of half wood and made a lair in a loop of the lug. A girl named Maud found the creature when it was small and fed it milk. It grew large and tame only for her. It took sheep and then cattle, and at last men. When the people could bear no more, archers and pikemen lured it into a field where wagons had made a wedge. They braced their shafts and stood tight. When it charged, the points met its throat. The dragon died. The village buried it and named an oak for the girl who had loved a thing that could not love her back without ruin. The story rings with the quiet habits of a place that knows floods and famine. Pity sits beside duty, and both are heavy. The line between romance and local memory blurs when you get to the river cities. In Krakow, they still tell how the Wawel dragon lived in a cave under the castle hill and took cattle from pastures along the Vistula. Nights came and failed. A cobbler's apprentice thought another way. He stuffed a calf skin with sulphur and pitch and left it by the mouth of the cave. The dragon swallowed the bait. Thirst took it like a fist. It ran to the river and drank until it split. The people said a prayer and set a simple man's name in their books. If you stand on the stones today, you can look up at the castle and down at a bronze dragon that breathes fire on a schedule for children. The old trick still warms the face. The chansons of the French march and the English romances carry knights into this same work, though they wrap it in the silk of courts. Sir Bevis of Hampton is thrown out of his home and grows to manhood abroad. He comes back with a sword named Morglay and kills a dragon near Southampton that had burned peasants in their fields. Guy of Warwick repents his pride, goes on pilgrimage, and comes home lean as a staff. He fights a dragon near Northumberland, and a giant and a strange cow, as big as a barn. The poems are large in their claims and generous in their geography. They do one useful thing without fail. They put a nobleman on the road alone, or with one friend, and make him answer for what his lands have suffered. A great house is not a hedge against monsters. A great house is a place from which a man leaves with a spear and a vow. To the east, the Slavic songs take on a harsher rattle. In the Bylina of Rus, a bogatyr named Dobrynya Nikitich is warned by his mother never to bathe in a certain river and never to tread on a certain stone. He does both, which is a way to say that a young warrior must test the law. The three-headed dragon Zmei Gorinik boils out. They fight for 3 days. The hero stands in boiling streams. He drives the creature to the Puchai stone, where roads meet and worlds touch. He cuts off 3 heads, and then 3 more, when the wives of the beast come howling. In other tellings, he frees a princess from the clutch of the dragon and sets a whole city to breathing again. The fights are long and dirty. They read like a winter that will not end until a man spends his whole body against it. If you walk west again to the Welsh marches and look up at the White Horse on the Downs, there is a bald patch on a little hill the folk call Dragon Hill. They say the earth there is bare because a dragon's blood fell and nothing will grow where it's soaked in. The shape of the story is old as chalk. A knight with a red cross on white fights a serpent with long claws and a hiss that carries over the ridge. A watcher could see the line of men on the hill and the banner shift in wind. Whether the tale names George or some other rider, the memory ties a bright blade to a real hill and fixes a truth about the fight. The wound that saves a village can mark a land for good. Behind the show and the sermons there is craft. These stories often pause to tell you what the fighter wore and why. A knight takes a thick gambeson under his mail so that a crush will not break his ribs outright. He carries a shield with rawhide shrunk over the face so that it will not split at once. He sets a long ash spear with an iron sock to keep the butt from shattering when he braces it in earth. If he has time, he digs a trench in the old way and lies in it with point upward, which is the one honest chance a man has against a weight with scales. If the dragon breathes flame in a tail, he drenches his cloak and throws it over the head like a hood for the blink of a strike. If it spits venom, he fights in the wind or with a kerchief soaked in wine, which at least gives him heart. Pitch and tow go on spearheads because fire rushes forward faster than a man can step. Lime dust blinds. Caltrops lame, bells startle. Dogs tell a watcher where the thing passes in reeds at night. A hero in a romance may ride into a picture with a clean sword. The village that raised him knows he also carried a sack of tricks. The layouts of the fights repeat. A spring is fouled and must be cleared. A narrow bridge becomes a funnel where a man can stand one against one. A hollow lane is a trap. A cave mouth frames the head so that a thrust has a chance to find the soft between plates. There is a stubborn faith in the belly strike. From Sigurd under Fafnir to the archer who finds the soft under a wing in Beowulf's barrow, the stories insist that even a scale wall has a seam. The seam is there to reward patience and nerve. Many of the dragons that fill these tales are lovers of treasure, and the knights who kill them earn more than the thanks of a town. They stand in a cave where the light rings like a struck bowl. Piled cups tilt against bosses and blades. Coins lie in drifts. There is silence, except for the little sound gold makes when a foot crosses it. It is a dangerous quiet. The poems know it. They often make the hero call in others to carry the wealth away in public, or they bury it again with the dead king and sing a warning. A hoard that sleeps in the dark will waken a worm. A hoard that passes through open hands to pay for bridges, walls, and bread will not. The dragon teaches thrift and duty as harshly as any priest. The dragon also trains courage that is not royal. Many slayers are not princes. A cobbler kills with a sulphur trick. A farmer straps knives to his coat and walks into a river knowing what water will carry away for him. A border rider figures out that a fire thrust into a mouth is better than a clean cut at a neck. The ballads keep their names and their villages. They praise the man who showed up with a tool that fit the work. The old customs sometimes fix the praise in law. When a new bishop of Durham crossed the Tees, local folk presented him with a falchion said to have killed the Sockburn worm, and he returned thanks and confirmed liberties. The shape of the ceremony said that the sword of a commoner and the seal of a prelate both held back dragons of different kinds. Art kept pace with the stories and taught the eye where to find the truth. Carvers set dragons at the feet of effigies so that the dead knight would always stand with a monster under his heel. Painters on church walls gave a secular slayer the same calm face a saint wears when he rides down a beast. Heralds put dragons on shields not only as charges to frighten foes, but as reminders that a family once held the line for a river town on a bad year. The creature that crouched on a cornice and spat rain could be read as a demon held in place. The creature on a shield could be read as a promise that someone in that house would not flinch when the bell clanged at noon. For all their steel and swagger, these stories still borrow from the old ways. A knight who succeeds often does so with help. A wife brings the torch at the right moment and sears the neck. A smith sets a rivet that will not shear. A wise woman tells a boy to stand in the current so the river will serve as an ally. The fight is communal. The victory is shared. The worst defeats in the tales come when a proud man rides out alone because he wants the glory without the council. The dragon gives him a quiet field and then takes everything. By the end of the medieval age, the dragon of the night has become a kind of mirror. It shows greed when it lies on gold. It shows hunger when it goes out at night and burns a bier to light the sky. It shows fear when a banner lifts above a band of men who would rather be in their fields, but who stand in the lane with ash spears all the same. It also shows wit and work. The right edge, the right bait, the right ground, the right friends. In that sense, the old fights taught the same lesson to lords and to ploughmen. You face what threatens your home with what you have and with who you trust, and you do not expect the world to hand you a fair fight. These are the tales that gave later writers their language. A barrow under turf, a voice from a scaled throat that promises death, the one soft place under the wing, a bright hoard and the smell of smoke, a good sword with a name, a fool in the crowd who thinks a trick is not courage. From here, the dragon walks out of the country and into the bookshop. It learns to talk at length. It takes on irony. It becomes an actor as well as an adversary. Yet you can still hear the river on its scales and see the soot on the rafters of the byre it burned. The Knight of the Ballads stands behind the novel and points with a spear at the same old seam. You can feel the ground shift in the 19th century. Old songs leave the hearth and enter books with cloth covers and gilt titles. Scholars gather myths and print them in thick volumes for families to read by lamplight. Children's shelves fill with fairy stories that carry traces of barrows and saints' days, but now the monsters live between engraved borders. This is where the dragon returns to the center of the page, not as a rumor from the next valley, but as a figure that writers can shape with care, with memory, and with a new sort of ambition. Antiquarians and collectors went first. The Brothers Grimm printed their household tales, and with them, a menagerie of serpents and monsters that had survived in kitchens and fields long after the old gods were gone. Andrew Lang's colored fairy books gathered wonders from many lands and put dragons and worms beside princes who had been fools and ploughmen who had been brave. The taste for medieval things grew. Artists like Gustave Doré and Arthur Rackham etched coils and claws in ink that looked like shadows from a fire. Poets and novelists reached back towards sagas and chansons. William Morris wrote romances that felt like a long walk in an old hall. Painters set nights under towers that had never seen gunpowder. Wagner gave the stage a brooding gold hoard and a dragon called Fafner who slept upon it. In that music, the serpent is more than a beast. It is the sound of greed that goes on until it eats the voice that sings it. Then a scholar in Oxford put the key in the lock. John Ronald Royal Tolkien spent his life reading the old tongues and the old songs. He stood before a lecture hall and said that the poem of Beowulf should be read for its monsters as well as for its heroes. The dragon in that poem was not a flaw, it was the hinge on which the whole thing turned. He went home and set a dragon on a pile of treasure. He gave it a name and a voice and a taste for talk. In The Hobbit, which appeared in 1937, Smaug wakes like a banked fire and fills a mountain with his breath. He is vain and clever. He toys with a thief who has slipped under his guard. He sniffs out the smell of dwarf and pony and coin. He counts without moving. He speaks in a way that makes the air taste of metal. Tolkien gave him a weak place where a scale was missing. He also gave him something rarer, which is a mind that believes itself the only clear mind in the story. The meeting between the small burglar and the great beast is a spell of conversation that pulls the whole history of northern dragons into one chamber. You can hear Fafnir in it, and you can hear the Barrow dragon, and you can hear the hiss of a fire that no man can quench once it gets loose in a town. Tolkien did not put many dragons on the road in The Lord of the Rings, but he salted the map with their traces. He wrote of cold drakes that once came out of the far north, of a dragon named Skaither who had been slain by a prince of the Eotheod long before the story we read, of the long ruin of a metal-making empire that had loved heat and shadow. Dragons here are history more than present danger. They are a way to say that fire and pride do not die in a single age. For a generation of readers, that was enough. Smaug alone could fill 1,000 winter nights. Other writers took the creature and tried new shapes. C.S. Lewis turned a spoiled boy named Eustace into a dragon on an island of hot springs and quiet terror. The boy wakes in a body that reflects his greed and his loneliness. He learns pain and he learns pity, and he is peeled back to a boy again by an act of grace that leaves a scar like truth does. Kenneth Grahame had already written The Reluctant Dragon, which told of a dragon who would rather quote poetry than fight, and of a knight who would rather keep peace than win a crowd. Those books taught children that a dragon could be a friend as well as a foe, and that sometimes the fight in the square is only a show to let a town keep its stories and its quiet at the same time. Ursula K. Le Guin walked in from a different shore. In Earthsea, the dragons speak the true language of the world. They do not bargain with coins, they bargain with names. They are old in a way that makes men seem like sparks in a wind. They are not pets, and they are not mounts. They do not love us. They recognize kinship, which is harder and colder and more honest. When a wizard learns the name of wind and wave, he begins to understand why a dragon does not need walls or kings. In those books, the dragon is meaning as much as muscle. It is the memory of a world before maps, when names had weight. Anne McCaffrey crossed a border that few had crossed before her and found a new home for the dragon. In The Dragon Riders of Pern, the beasts are not monsters from an old poem. They are living partners shaped by human craft to fight a rain of deadly threads that fall from the sky. A woman touches a hatchling, and the bond that forms is closer than love and fiercer than fear. Riders flame the air to burn what would devour field and forest. Those dragons speak mind to mind. They carry their riders through space and a strange fold in time. The books are science fiction, and they are also ballads of work and care and endurance. They make the dragon a creature that lives inside a human community and gives more than it takes. Later, writers filled the shelves with other lives for the old beast. Terry Pratchett found room on the flat world for swamp dragons that were nervous and combustible, and for a king of dragons raised by a bookish girl who helps it remember that power without duty is only appetite with a crown. Robin Hobb sent sailors down a river of memory toward a sea where half-formed dragons struggled to be born. In those books, the creatures have history in their bones, suffer from the acts of men who use them, and demand a terrible fairness when they grow strong again. Naomi Novik took the British war against Napoleon and asked what would happen if dragons flew in formation over Trafalgar. A captain wins a hatchling by chance, gives up a life he thought he understood, and learns to become the friend of a mind that will never grow old. Christopher Paolini let a farm boy find a stone that was an egg and used the oldest warmth in story. The bond between a human life and a growing thing that needs it. Patricia Reed taught a princess to bring a cup of tea to a cave and talk to a dragon as if it were a neighbor, which is as brave as any stroke of a blade. Young readers grew up on these books and then carried dragons into classrooms and coffee shops and late-night arguments. Some wrote the beasts as enemies again, because a story still needs a fear. Others wrote them as nations, as gods in exile, as survivors, as lawyers, as mothers who will burn a city if a child is threatened. The best of these tales remember to make the dragon a person and not a prop. A hoard is not an abstract fault. It is a choice to keep what others need. A fire is not a trick. It is hunger made visible. A flight across a mountain range is not a line on a map. It is a way to see a world that men on foot cannot see. When a writer holds those truths steady, the dragon breathes and the page gets warm. Illustrators did as much work as writers to fix the look of the modern dragon. Pauline Baynes drew Smaug like a jewel that had learned to move. Alan Lee and John Howe painted scales that seemed to remember damp stone and ash. Michael Whelan lit McCaffrey's dragons in skies that felt like a real wind. In the margins of these books, and on their covers, a new canon of shapes took hold. 4 legs and wings for one tradition. A long serpentine body with no wings for another. Eyes that are too clear. Teeth that are tools rather than decoration. Claws that can pick up a cup as well as tear a shield. Smoke that rolls out of a mouth before the fire arrives. A tail that is not a rope but a limb with choices. The revival in print also taught readers how dragons think. Smaug speaks in a voice that loves tricky promises. Fafnir mutters deep and slow and sounds tired of being alive. The dragons of Earthsea speak in a language that would turn a human throat to fire. McCaffrey's dragons speak with a kindness that can become steel in a breath when a rider is in danger. Pratchett's dragon speaks like a king who has read the wrong books and believes they were written for him alone. Hobbes' dragons begin as a chorus of half-memories and wake to anger that is not blind. Each voice tells you what the creature means in that world. If it speaks like a miser, it will lie on coins. If it speaks like a storm, it will not care who is wet and who is dry. If it speaks like a friend, it will still be a friend with talons, because truth keeps its shape even when it loves you. Why did this happen in the modern age rather than in the very old one? Part of the answer is that printing gave monsters the same long life it gave saints and emperors. A boy or girl in a city far from moors and fjords could open a book and enter a cave when the school day ended. Another part is that the modern world made people hungry for things that felt older than factories. A dragon is a reminder that wealth is not only coins, that power is more than a machine, that courage may be a small figure walking into a dark place with a word ready and a hand steady on a blade. In a century of wars and wires and screens, the old shape gave writers a way to talk about greed that kills from far away, about courage that looks like care rather than noise, about promises between minds that hold when the weather turns foul. There is also the meeting of worlds. Translators and travelers brought East Asian tales into English and French and many other tongues. The dragon kings of Chinese rivers and the serpents that shelter the Buddha began to appear beside Western worms in anthologies and picture books. Some writers took care with this. They wrote dragons of rain and river who would be insulted by a horde. They set a ruler on a dragon throne and asked what that duty meant. Others mixed shapes freely and made a new thing that shows where we live now. in a world where symbols cross oceans as fast as ships once crossed bays. The best of these crossings feel like a bow rather than a theft. They let a reader learn that a dragon can be a neighbor rather than an enemy, and that water can be holiness rather than hazard. As the shelves grew heavy, a pattern settled into the bones of the modern dragon tale. A writer will choose one of a few paths: the dragon as adversary, which asks for craft and nerve; the dragon as ally, which asks for trust and cost; the dragon as mind, which asks for listening; the dragon as mirror, which asks for the hard look a person gives to the part of themselves that wants and wants. Good stories often braid more than one of these together. A dragon can be a friend and still be a test. A dragon can be a mind and still be a mouth that burns. So the old beast walked out of the barrow and into the bookshop, not tamed, not reduced, but translated into a language that millions could share. It learned to speak on the page. It learned to think with us. It learned to live long enough to pass from one reader to another and to change a little each time. That is what literature does with the things that matter. It keeps them in the light, and it gives them new work to do. Before a dragon flew across a cinema screen, it paced through painted backdrops and limelight smoke. 19th century showmen loved a good monster. Fairground panoramas unfurled battles between knights and scaled beasts, while a hidden organ gave the roar. Toy theaters sold cutout dragons on stiff paper, so a child could stage a last stand at the kitchen table. When moving pictures arrived, the appetite was ready. The question was how to make a creature of smoke and story look as if it had weight. Animation and tricks of light tried first. In early fantasy reels, a painted serpent might rise from a tank and vanish in a jump cut. The craft deepened as model makers learned patience. Mid-century adventure films turned to stop motion and made dragons that could hold the eye. Ray Harryhausen set a chained dragon to clash with a cyclops and gave Jason a many-headed hydra whose necks writhed one by one. The trick was not only the movement. It was the sense that light from the set fell across a body that was really there. Scales caught it. Eyes glinted. A tail threw a shadow that made a boy in the third row curl his toes inside his shoes. A single film in the early 80s turned many viewers into believers. Dragonslayer gave the world Vermithrax, a name that sounded like iron dragged across stone. The creature crawled and leapt with a cruel grace. Its wings creaked like old leather. Its lair felt damp and used. Fire came in a sheet that seemed to weigh as much as water. For once, the countryside around the beast looked like a place that grew food and kept cows. There was mud on boots and fear in voices. People walked out of theaters arguing about what they had seen, and then went back in to see it again. That dragon has not left the craft since. Artists still measure a new design against that long head and that ragged wing. Animation made a different kind of promise. When Maleficent became a dragon at the end of Sleeping Beauty, a cliff seemed to grow a spine and stand up. The beast on the screen felt like rage given a body. Years later, a boy met a dragon named Elliot, who was soft-hearted and green and wanted a home. A story about kindness set the creature down in the middle of a lumber town and made a lesson without preaching. Then a white-furred luck dragon took to the clouds in the never-ending story and carried a sad child out of despair. That long body was not built to frighten. It was built to say that help arrives when you call in the right way. The 90s found a new road by giving a dragon a voice that sounded like a weathered man. Dragonheart asked its audience to befriend a creature who would rather make jokes than war, yet who was bound by an old oath. The mouth moved with a rhythm that matched the words, and suddenly a dragon could speak to a knight as an equal. Not every tale of that decade chose gentleness. One took a ruined London and turned the sky into a hunting ground, where dragons nested in towers and made fire a harvest. That vision pushed the beast into the modern world and asked how steel and grit might answer it. Fantasy epics put dragons back into great caverns. Filmmakers gave Smaug a voice that tasted of metal and a slow curl that felt like a flame catching a dry rafter. The talk between a small thief and a vast hoard's keeper borrowed tension from the oldest stories and married it to new craft. Fire-lit coins, smoke slid along gold like a living thing. Audiences leaned forward for the soft moment when a single scale admitted a flaw. Around the same years, another saga sent 3 young dragons over cities and winter fields and turned them into weapons of state. They began as small creatures that fit in a chest and grew into forces that broke armies. The shows did not spare the cost of that power. When a dragon burned a field, you saw the cinders and you counted the bushels lost. On another path, animation found joy in flight and in trust. A village at war with monsters learned that a dragon is not an enemy by nature. A boy reached a trembling hand toward a wary head. He listened. He learned how the wind moves around a fin, and how a rider must move with a body he cannot control by force. The film's music made the air seem to lift the seats. The acts that followed were acts of care. Harnesses were built and rebuilt. Saddles were tested. Friends were made. The point was not victory in a single battle. It was the making of a life where people and dragons fit each other and were both better for the bond. Far from those northern cliffs, a river spirit took the form of a dragon in a bathhouse where nothing was as it seemed. The body was long and lithe. The face was kind and wary at once. He moved through air as if air were water. That shape came from a different tradition, one that ties dragons to rivers and rain and the memory of a place. In that story, the child learns the true name of the dragon, and in doing so, frees him to be what he was. No horde waits in that tale. No knight comes with a spear. There is only the hard work of remembering and the quiet work of letting go. Television had been getting ready for dragons for a long time. In the 80s, a band of children met a many-headed queen of evil in a cartoon that borrowed its rules from tabletop dice. For many viewers, that was the first time a dragon had more than one face. Years later, a new series asked a different question. What happens when dragons are not a rumor, but a fact that anyone can see from a city wall? The answer required a small army of artists and a long patience. The beasts grew from puppets and sketches into presences that bent grass and stirred dust. They cast shadows that made soldiers blink. They did not only arrive to burn, they slept in courtyards. They strained against chains. They cracked bones while they ate. The shows taught audiences to recognize the difference between a dragon that is hungry and a dragon that is angry. Games took dragons and made them a trial that a player could survive only by learning. At the table, the first role-playing rule set made dragons the measure of a party's nerve. One queen with 5 raging heads guarded her spawn. One ancient king of the skies ruled a calm, lawful domain. Those names moved from rulebooks into novels, and from novels back into game nights. On screens, an open world let a wanderer shout words of power and pull a dragon out of the clouds. A fight was part duel and part hunt. You listened for a roar across a ridge. You watched for the swerve that meant a dive. You counted breaths. You learned when to stand and when to run for the cover of a ruined tower. Other worlds made dragons the last guardians of secret dungeons. Some made them gods in the shapes of beasts. Some let the player raise one from an egg and carry it through a war. In every case, the lesson was the same lesson as in the old fields by the barrow. Knowledge first. Courage next. Luck if it comes. Card tables and living room floors filled with dragons of a different kind. A red-winged icon took pride of place on a collector's card. A wise elder dragon learned to plan across centuries and break worlds with thought. Children traded a white-eyed dragon with a name that seemed to shout. A boy in another show gathered 7 glowing orbs and called up a serpent of the sky who granted wishes. The creatures on these cards and screens were not only enemies, they were goals. They were puzzles. They were prizes that turned a good afternoon into a story a child could tell all week. Music and sport borrowed the shape. A red dragon on a green and white field waved from castle walls and rugby grounds and kept a nation's memory awake. A club rode out with a dragon on its shirts and filled a stadium with the sound of drums and hope. A university told its students to be dragons and learn to breathe an honest fire in their work. In these uses, the old fear falls away and the pride remains. The creature stands for grit and for nerves that hold in the last minutes of a tight match. Theme parks and parades carried dragons through crowds as if a festival were a living book. A wire frame and silk body snaked above heads while drums counted the steps. In another park, a dragon perched on a bank and breathed fire on a schedule, a harmless thrill that still made small children step back and then laugh when the heat kissed their faces. Merchants understood what they saw in those faces. Toy shelves filled with plastic and plush. Modelers sat at kitchen tables and shaped tiny scales with knives under magnifiers. Painters learned to do a convincing eye that looked alive at 3 feet. Nature programming added a modern twist. A large lizard in Indonesia kept the old name and reminded viewers that a mouthful of bacteria and a heavy tail are dragon enough for a man who walks too close. A television special staged a make-believe dig and asked what a dragon's bones would look like if they had ever been found. Scientists played along and explained why wings would need to grow this way and why fire would not. The show gave ordinary people a way to hold both the dream and the doubt without spoiling either. Technology changed the grammar of dragons on screen. Practical models could move ahead and beat wings. Computer-generated imagery could make a body ripple from nose to tail. The best work often mixes both. A flame begins as a torch under a camera and becomes a moving sheet that lights a hall and scorches a shield. Ash sticks to a cheek because a makeup artist sat in a chair at dawn and made it so. A rider leans on a saddle that sits on a rig that bucks like a storm, while a blank wall stands in for a sky that will be painted later. The difference between a good dragon and a forgettable one is not only money, it is the respect for how light falls and how weight shifts. It is the memory that a dragon is a character with habits and a past, not only a noise that burns a barn. Through all these shapes, the same old themes survive. Greed draws trouble. Power without duty costs more than a city can pay. Trust turns fear into strength. Names have weight. A watcher at a spring is as old as a village and as new as a splash screen. When a dragon descends, the story has to decide if this creature is a storm to be endured, a neighbor to be understood, or a mirror held up to a person who has taken more than they need. Good stories do not rush that choice. They let a dragon be terrible and noble in turn. They let awe do its work. So the dragon now lives in theaters, on couches, on game nights, in schoolyards, and on jerseys. It is a sound cue and a team name and a blue glow on a phone. It is also still the shape you see when a cloud stack over a hot field looks like a spine and a head, and your heart beats faster for a reason you cannot say out loud. The creature belongs to us as much as it ever did. It walks with us into a century of new tools and old needs, and keeps asking the same questions with smoke on its breath. If you gather every dragon you have met in these pages and set them side by side, the first thing you notice is that each one wears the shape of its homeland. Where rivers rule the year, the dragon is long-bodied and lithe, and it rides cloud and rain as if those were its own thoughts. Where winters are hard and barrows stud the hills, the dragon lies heavy on treasure and on memory. In places where kings must prove that heaven allows them to rule, the dragon rises on banners and on robes. The creature is a mirror for the work a people must do to live. It teaches by fear and by favor. It tells you what a community thinks is sacred and what it thinks is dangerous. In China, the dragon speaks of water, order, and right rule. It coils in cloud and dives in rivers. It carries a pearl that painters leave just out of reach, a bright knot of wisdom or thunder that kings claim when they stand where they belong. The five-clawed dragon on an emperor's robe is not only a decoration, it is a promise that rain will come in season and that canals and granaries will be kept with care. The 9 dragons carved on palace walls stare from a sea of glazed waves so that courtiers will not forget who holds the balance. In the streets, dragons live as boats and dances. A drumbeat becomes thunder, a silk body rides the air, and a city asks the year to be kind. Even the language of the stars sets a dragon in the east to guard spring. In this world, the dragon is not usually an enemy. It is a patron. It gives the farmer hope and the magistrate a measure. It also gives the ruler a warning, since a bad flood or a bitter drought can be read as the dragon turning its head away. Across India and Southeast Asia, the serpent kings show how water and life are woven together. A naga with a fan of many hoods guards a stair and a spring. A temple bridge in Angkor runs between living stone bodies that curve like river snakes, and a king claims his duty by linking his city to that strength. A village in Bengal honors Manasa for keeping snakebite away and for sending the right rains at the right time. A statue of Mukalinda spreads its hoods over the meditating Buddha and says that wisdom needs shelter when storms gather. In Laos and Thailand, river towns keep serpent shrines where currents twist and the water looks watchful. Boat races churn the brown surface, while bells ring and prayers rise for good harvests. Everywhere the lesson is the same. Speak to the river with respect, keep the banks in repair, and make your offerings. If you insult the powers under the water or neglect the dikes, a serpent will show you how quickly fortune can turn. Korea and Japan add other threads to the cloth. An imugi can endure for long years and rise as a true dragon when it wins a pearl that falls from the sky. That story tells a boy beside a pond that patience and worth can lift a creature higher than birth will. A Japanese dragon stands at a temple basin and pours clean water through a bronze mouth. It keeps the act of washing the hands and the mouth before prayer from becoming an empty habit. It reminds the visitor that water is a gift and that names have weight, since dragons in those islands are also the shapes taken by sea gods who keep their own treasures and their own rules. When a child learns the name of a river and says it with care, the river becomes a neighbor rather than a map line. In the West, a dragon means something different because the landscape asks other things from a person who lives there. In Greek, the word drakon comes from a root that has to do with seeing hard and keeping watch. So the creature coils beside a spring or a grove and does not sleep. It guards a fleece that shines in the dark and a tree full of golden apples. It watches for those who want to take what is not theirs, or to build a new order where an older one still holds. The hero who kills it or lulls it must prove not only courage, but also right. The fight marks a change that everyone will have to live with. Delphi belongs to Apollo only after Python dies at the sacred spring. Thebes rises only after Cadmus pays for the serpent he slew, and only after the teeth he sowed grow into men who will build the walls. The dragon is the price of a new city. In the north, the creature learns new habits. It lies on gold because men bury wealth in mounds and leave it in graves, and because winter makes food and coin feel like different forms of the same thing. A dragon that loves treasure is a warning about greed that grows warm in the dark and wakes to burn farms when a single cup goes missing. Fafnir is a man who loved gold until he became the thing that loves it most. The Beowulf dragon is the last test of a king who has paid his dues and who will pay one more. Nidhogg gnaws at the root to remind you that every good thing has something working at its base and that neglect is a kind of invitation to rot. Jormungandr sleeps in the sea with its tail in its mouth and makes honest men feel small when they lift their eyes to the horizon. All of these are not only monsters. They are ways of talking about winter, about wealth, about the patience of trouble, and about the price of keeping a people safe. In the age of the church, the dragon puts on moral clothes because villagers want stories that speak plainly about sin and hope. A scaled belly becomes a book you can read in a market square. Pride and greed coil in the dark and breathe out a breath that smells like plague. A saint arrives with prayer and with a pattern of words that have been said for 1,000 mornings, and the well runs clear again. Sometimes the dragon bows its head at a stole and walks behind a woman who sings a psalm. Sometimes it dies under a lance after a town promises to change its life. Gargoyles on high roofs spit rain away from saints carved in stone. The old serpent that once fouled the water is set to keep walls dry. The message is practical and kind. Order the world, honor what feeds you, and do not keep more than your share when your neighbor's child is hungry. There are places where the serpent is not a beast to fear at all, but a teacher and a giver. Among the Maya and the Mexica, the feathered serpent stands for wind, learning, and the burden of office. A god with a serpent body and a crest of Quetzal plumes walks between sky and earth and brings rules for cities and calendars that keep fields in step with the sun. On an equinox, the shadow of a stair falls on the flank of a pyramid, as if a serpent made of light were moving down to meet the people. This is not a dragon guarding a horde. It is a lord who gives order and asks a price in return. Knowledge in those stories is a gift with edges, and the one who carries it must accept limits or be punished by the powers that gave it. Heraldry and emblems keep the older meanings alive even when people forget the old rites. A red dragon lifts from the flag of a small country that remembers a long fight for its own name. A thunder dragon glares from the flag of a mountain kingdom and tells every traveler that storms and conscience are part of its life. A city ties its pride to a dragon on a bridge, and a knight on its seal rides down a serpent that looks as if it might be a snake from the next field as easily as a demon. A Roman standard with a cloth body and a metal head becomes a rallying point that sounds like wind rushing through a living throat. The shape of the creature is a way to say that a people watches, that it will not be moved lightly, and that it claims the right to stand where it stands. Old books of learning adopt the serpent into their diagrams. A circle of a snake biting its tail turns up in manuals that teach students about matter and spirit and the cycle of change. The note beside it says the same thing the sea serpent says, only in a scribe's hand. All things feed what follows. Endings feed beginnings. The careful man minds the seam where one becomes the other. A dragon that coils around the world in a poem does the same work with stronger light. Across these meanings, a few hard truths repeat until they feel like laws. The first is that water is life, and that power over water is power over life. When a dragon rules cloud and river, the people must learn respect, and the ruler must learn how to deserve that robe. The second is that wealth kept in the dark will bring ruin. When a dragon lies on a hoard, a boy with a shovel will soon be lying in a trench with a sword, and a village will burn either way. The third is that boundaries matter. Springs, doorways, bridges, and the edges of fields belong to no one and to everyone. A watcher at those places is a friend if you keep your promises, and an enemy if you break them. The fourth is that courage is both a private act and a public trust. A saint with a leash, a knight with a spear, a cobbler with a sulphur trick, a farmer with knives on his coat, a magistrate who fasts and begs for rain, a mother who brings the torch at the right moment. Each faces a dragon so that others can drink, plant, sleep, and wake up to work. The last truth is that dragons are not simple symbols. They can bless and they can blight. They can mean pride and they can mean rightful rule. They can burn a barn and they can pour clean water from a stone mouth in rain. That is why they endure. A culture can set its fears and its hopes on the same, scaled back, and be understood. A story can move from field to palace and from shrine to school, without losing the thread because the creature at its heart is large enough to carry many meanings without breaking. Put all of this together, and you can see why every age finds its own dragon. A village that lives by a river sees a long body in cloud and calls for rain with drums. A court that claims heaven's favor puts dragons on robes and is judged when floods come and granaries fail. A hall that keeps too much gold learns what shape guilt can take when it sleeps in a mound. A church that serves the poor finds a way to set the beast to spitting rain off the walls. A nation that needs courage for a hard match or a hard winter gives itself a dragon and holds the line under its eye. Through it all, the creature remains what it has always been, a face for power that can help or harm, a test of the heart that holds the spear. A story that teaches work and watchfulness in the language of fire and water and scale. If you want to know why dragons keep returning, walk first into a medicine shop in old China and look at the labeled jars. For centuries, apothecaries ground longu, which means dragon bone, into powders for fevers and fractures. The bones were not from dragons. They were the petrified remains of great creatures that slept in stone long before men made cities, but no one knew that. Farmers dug a jaw from a riverbank and brought it to market. A merchant pressed a coin into a calloused palm and wrote a neat tag that said dragon. A story took on physical weight. People carried it home in paper packets. There is power in a myth you can hold. Across the world, other people found strange things in the ground and made sense of them with the same ready word. A shepherd on an island beach lifted a slab and saw a rib cage like the frame of a boat. Fishermen found black teeth shaped like spearheads and called them tongues turned to stone. A farmer pulled a horn core as long as his arm from a damp English field, and the village said giant or dragon without much need to choose. Church porches in sea towns hung whale jaw bones, and everyone called them sea monsters and felt better under their shadow. When a thing that big turns up in your fence line, your mind reaches for the oldest container strong enough to hold it. Dragon is a hard word. It does not leak. There are living beasts that keep the tale alive as well. A Nile crocodile pulled upstream by a flood into quiet water looks like a dragon to any eye that has not learned its proper name. And some did swim into the old Mediterranean and gave people in cloaks a very bad morning. A surfacing whale lifts a long back from the sea and vanishes again without a sound, and the sight sits in the throat of a sailor for the rest of his life. An oarfish rolls under a wave like a silver banner, and the mind says sea serpent before it can say anything else. On bright islands to the south of Java, a great lizard watches with a steady look, pads forward without hurry, and pulls down a goat. The mouth bleeds, the tail swings like a club, the hide looks hammered. The people there did not need a book to give that creature a name that fits. They had already invented the right one. Sky and stone add their share. A blazing rock falls at night and bruises a field. For years afterward, the elders will point at the scar when a comet bright as a sword root sweeps the sky and say that this is a place to watch. Belemnites, which are fossil squid and shaped like little spears, turn up in ploughed furrows, and villagers call them thunderbolts and tuck them under a roof beam for luck. A volcano coughs fire into a dark cloud and sets ash falling like sifted flour. A lake suddenly spits up a rotten breath because a pocket of gas found a split in the rock. Imagine explaining those things before the words existed. You would reach for your oldest story and give it the flag. The old human senses help the story along. People see faces in clouds and figures in wood grain without meaning to. A ridge of storm on a hot afternoon looks like a neck and a jaw, and for a heartbeat you expect it to turn its head and look back. A cave mouth looks like a throat. A river bend hisses where the current slides under a root, and your mind says that something is breathing there. None of this requires a priest or a poet. It is the way brains keep you alive. We notice movement at the edge of sight. We fill missing pieces with the most dangerous shape that fits. We prefer to be wrong on the side that runs. Anthropologists have taken this farther and asked whether the dragon is a bundle tied from very old fears, fears that kept our people living long enough to be our people. We are quick to spot the coil of a snake against leaf litter. We do not need to be taught to watch a big cat's eyes. We look up when a raptor's shadow passes. Put those three together in the slow light of a cave mouth or the hard light of a savanna, and you get a creature the size of all your troubles that can strike from ground, grass, or sky. Give it a hard hide, because teeth bounce off panic, unless you give the panic a weakness. Give it a breath that burns, because fire is the oldest fear we have never learned to turn our backs on. The dragon is an animal that does not live, but that matches the way we have lived for a very long time. The old books of wonders added more cords to the bundle. Medieval lapidaries wrote of draconites, stones cut from the heads of living dragons that could cure what no doctor could. Try to imagine the scene that is being taught there. A lord stands with knife drawn beside a sleeping beast, and three men hold a sack under the jaw, while a priest whispers a prayer that the last breath of the dragon will bless the stone and not curse it. It is a legend about daring and about the value of what is paid for with danger. Good myths double as parables for commerce and courage. Natural mistakes become evidence and stay that way long after a better answer exists. A tooth of a giant shark sits on a bishop's desk. He calls it a dragon's tongue and holds it to the throat of a man he believes poisoned. The patient thrives, and the tooth joins the reliquaries when the bishop dies. A crocodile skin is nailed to a church beam after a crusader marches home with a story. Children grow up under it. They inherit the fear and the relief. When a fisherman loses a boat in a fog and two bodies wash ashore, the priest points to the skin and says that old powers have not left the world and that fear still has a shape. There is a practical side as well. A dragon is a useful villain. It is large enough to force a city to act together. It is not an army, and it is not a neighbor, so the story can punish it without starting a feud that outlives the teller. It keeps a spring that a village needs or a road that a caravan must travel. That is better than a monster that slinks from cottage to cottage, which makes a town hunch its shoulders and lock its doors. A dragon sits and watches. It sets a deadline. It asks for coin or for cattle. It demands a pattern of gifts. It is a thing that can be faced. This is the kind of enemy that a good story loves because the hero can make a plan and the crowd can stand and see the plan work. The dragon is also a perfect test. It has a hide that turns blades and a breath that withers courage. Victory requires a weak place that must be found by someone who listens, or who watches longer than fear can stand, or who is humble enough to accept help. That is the sort of lesson a mother tells a child near a fire. Be brave, yes, but be clever first, and be willing to carry water for the one who holds the torch. Knights learn that lesson in songs. Villagers learn it by laying a muddy plank across a ditch so that the hunter in the trench can stand just high enough to strike. The story of a dragon teaches tannery and theology at once. Greed has always needed a body. When people learn to bury silver and lay sword belts and cups in their dead king's barrow, something in the village wonders whether the wealth will change under earth. A dragon makes the worry simple. It says that a hoard sleeps like an animal and wakes like one, and that it will claim a life a generation hence if the living do not keep their promises to the dead. Later ages keep the beast for a different lesson. A banker in a bright hall holds too much, and a city goes hungry at night. The mind reaches for a picture. It does not reach for a ledger. It reaches for a dragon with a dim eye that does not leave the coins it counts. A writer can hang that picture in the first chapter, and a reader knows the measure of what follows without a word about interest. Dragons also carry the clean truth that power is not kind unless someone forces it to be. A ruler who sits on a dragon throne is already telling the country that this is a reign that will be judged by rain and by banks kept in repair. If the rivers rise at the wrong hour and the harvest fails, the people will say the dragon has turned away. In another land, a queen walks with 3 young dragons and learns that the heat in their breath is a glory and a cost, and that mercy has to walk beside fire if a crown is to mean anything more than ruin with a banner. The creature makes the weight of power visible. You can see it in the eyes and count it in acres of ash. Look at the places where dragons returned strongest in the last century, and you will see that the ground was ready. Industrial life gathered people into cities and replaced the rhythms of weather with the rhythms of factory bells. A longing grew for old shapes that spoke to river and stone and wind. Dragons walked back in through ink and paint, and the sound of a brass section at the moment when the curtain rises on a dark cavern. At the same time, science offered a better story about the bones in the ground. A boy could look at a diagram of a sauropod on a classroom wall and then open a book that shows a red scaled thing on a hoard and feel the thrill of both. One is the truth of the earth. One is the truth of the heart. Together they keep a mind alive. There is a child's reason too, which is not small. Children want a shape to fear and a shape to love. They want to test themselves against a cliff, and a story is the safest cliff that exists. A dragon can be a friend if you approach with care, which is a lesson you can carry to any living thing worth knowing. A dragon can be an enemy who deserves its end, which is a thought that belongs to a day when the world seems full of teeth. A good tale will let the child meet both without being crushed. The beast becomes a schoolmaster who does not mark the slate with red chalk, but who still gets through. There is also the simple wonder of flight and flame. People look up, we always have. Birds taught us to envy. Dragons let us pretend. A dragon with wings makes a body imagine how it would feel to rise from a cliff and set a river line beneath your feet. A dragon with fire lets a heart that feels small and cold picture itself warm and feared for the length of one scene. These are not bad wishes. They are one way to practice being a person who will have to rise and who will have to learn when to be fierce and when to be gentle. At the edge of all these human reasons stands the quiet pull of the old world. Many people say that a serpent holds up the earth, or binds it or threatens it. The symbol is a handle on the thought that creation is not finished and that the world has to be kept. You can pray that into a ritual. You can work it into a canal. You can put it on a team jersey. You can cast it in a film that lights a cinema as bright as noon. The pull stays the same. We like to see the thing that frightens us and holds us and helps us. We like to imagine standing before it with something in our hand that will do. The strangest truth of all is that dragons are so clear that they can be anything and still be themselves. They can be a river spirit under a temple roof. They can be an old king of the barrows. They can be a saint's lesson in a square. They can be a voice in a cavern that speaks like a winter fire. They can be a partner who carries a rider through rain. They can be a banner over a gate or a toy above a crib. The shape holds. The meanings change like the weather over a range of mountains, and the creature walks on through it, large as ever, scaled with memory and with need. So dragons endure because stone keeps secrets and gives them up one jaw at a time. They endure because fear keeps watch, and imagination keeps giving fear a face. They endure because communities need a common enemy and a common helper, and because a single body can do both jobs. They endure because gold is still heavy, because storms still come, because rulers still need to be judged, because children still ask for one more story when the fire has gone low and someone has to get up to close the door.